moved and seconded to approve the agenda, please say aye. Our first item here is a public hearing,
Michael.
fiscal year budget.
So later you'll be voting on, approving a budget amendment for the FY 2024 budget. And as part of that process, we have to have a public hearing on, the said budget amendment. So we just need to open the public hearing and close it, because I don't think we have any. Just need to open the.
Okay. A motion to open the public hearing? Don't need a motion. The meeting will then, we'll open the public hearing for the budget amendment. Are there any comments?
That's just to amend last year's budget.
Correct.
The one that we're in right now.
Okay. For later, once we actually,
Okay, there'll be no public comment, we'll close that public hearing. And, we'll explain what we're dealing with here.
Right.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's in the administrative division.
All right. I think we got it all figured out. Any, public comment, anything else? Any comment? Superintendent's report.
Okay, my calendar says May 13th, so that means that, by the time this month ends, so the school year ends technically on, Friday, May 24th, so we have 9 more school days left in the year. Been another very successful year in all ways, academically, in the arts and athletics. I just was down briefly at the, fine arts celebration that's going on right now on the PAC, and, our kids and staff have just done an outstanding job, throughout the year again, and too, especially down the stretch here where we've had to deal with some not so fun topics, especially around finances and budget. Our people kept their eye on the ball, continued to serve our kids well. Our kids just thrived like they didn't even know what was going on, because they really didn't, because the high level of professionalism of our staff meant that every day they just came and served kids and did a great job. And obviously, too, the 7 of you play a huge role in that. This is School Board Appreciation Month, and so you all have certificates from the IASB and the district thanking you for your work and the highest paid volunteer job known to man. Our guest, Dr. Townsley, and I were having a discussion here before the meeting tonight, and talking about, again, what you as a board have faced from election. You went immediately into the superintendent search, you got that done. You immediately went into dealing with the issue around benefits for staff, you got that done. You then immediately went into talking about savings in the budget that were necessary, you got that done, and did so with a high level of professionalism and skill, especially when the fact is that you're really a brand new board together, and you would never have known that from the hard work that you put in, and from all the great work that you've done. And we've been blessed when I talk to people in other districts, another district I've been in, where they have struggles with boards, and that's just not us, and that's because of the 7 of you. So just wanted to publicly thank you for all of your great work throughout the course of this year, and wish you the best moving forward. There is cake up there behind Mr. Hougsey, I do believe. So feel free at any time to get up, or during or after the meeting, to take part in celebrating School Board Appreciation Month, if there's any cake left with Ms. Katie's.
I'm in somewhere that's a really dangerous place. I just want you to know that.
If you need to be the leader, feel free, but and we just, I think we're getting our heads around how to do the search, or we are now scheduled next week to do interviews for, we're planning on doing interviews next week for the school business official position, so we're moving forward there. And we're really close to tying things up with how we're going to work in the teacher pay law. And so that will set us up then to be able to get contracts produced and ready. We'll have a discussion about that here later on in the week. But again, just another great year. I'm thankful for the community's support. Thankful for the board's support, and great work done by our staff, our kids continue to thrive. Know that will be true in the future.
Thank you. Any questions or comments from the board? The action information items, our first one is a report from Dr. Matt Townsley on our standards-based practices.
We are thrilled to have Dr. Townsley from the University of Northern Iowa, a former Mount Vernon resident, here tonight to talk to us about the work that he's done with looking at our standards-based practices. Standards-based practices have always been the norm at the elementary school for years and years, but then we went into a more concerted focus on standards-based practices through evidence-based reporting about 8 years ago. What you know as EBR, and we have over the last couple of years done some deeper digging into kind of what's our current reality with making the move to these practices. And this year, this is something that we've talked with the board for the last couple of years about, is doing some type of surveying and gathering of information from our people. So Dr. Townsley did come in and do some focus groups with our people, did some online surveys with our people. And he's here tonight to present his data and information from that work. And also too, I'll ask the principals to eventually chime in, at least Bob and Matt and Steve, because I know they did some professional learning last week around the results of this information from Dr. Townsend's work. So our people are already diving into what does this mean for us. So without further ado, the floor is yours, sir.
All right, great. Hey, it's a pleasure to be with you all. As Dr. mentioned, I am a former Mount Vernon resident. Actually got to drive by my old house as I came here tonight. It's great to be back in 52314. Hey, I want you right now, before you get started, I want you to think about your absolute favorite sweet or salty snack. Pretzels it could be, or that candy bar might be. Salivating right now, excited about it. Maybe that cake over there is getting you excited. The excitement that you have for that salty or sweet snack is the excitement I have for the topic tonight. I literally get up every day excited to think about grading. And so I don't know if I've met all of you yet, but I'm a former teacher, administrator. I currently work at the University of Northern Iowa, where I teach aspiring principals and superintendents in the area of educational leadership. And I just absolutely love grading, and so that's my area of expertise, and I research and talk about and think about and support schools. But today I come to you not as a University of Northern Iowa professor, but as someone who Dr. Batenhorst reached out to and says, hey, can you give us an outside perspective on this grading we've got going on? And so hopefully in your board packet you have access to the real report here. I'm going to try to summarize some of the high points of this report for you all as board members today. I'm not going to get into every single chart and graph because you can look at it here.
If they had received it via email a couple
Okay.
days ago, so
Okay.
it's not.
Woo! All right, good. Okay, all right. You'll see the most important information up here on the screen. What I want you to know is that at the end of our time, you're welcome to ask me questions. All right, like, hey Matt, can you tell me more about this? What did you do? What does this mean for us? My aim is to try to share with you the highlights of what I found out, and also some of the recommendations that I shared in this report. So with that said, the purpose of all of this, just so we kind of know where we're starting, as I came into this whole, person coming from the outside, what's going on with grading practices at Mount Vernon, my aim was just to provide as an extra perspective on the whole EBR framework, evidence-based reporting. What's working well? Where we kind of may be inconsistent, and where can we get even better? And so the two questions I was hoping to answer are, to what extent are the school's grading practices being implemented with fidelity? And in what ways are the school's grading practices producing the desired outcomes? And so I want to take a step back first and just kind of tell you that, why is all this important? Why am I salivating over this topic of grading, all right? Well, in 2016, the best, the awesomest educational researchers, Dr. Thomas Guskey and Dr. Susan Brookhart, they summarized over 100 years of grading research at that time. As a result of all of their research, they published a paper in one of the most prominent educational journals in education called the Review of Educational Research. And then they took all of that information, those two and their team, and they tried to put it into a format that educators could read, and that book is called What We Know About Grading. Okay? And so what I kind of came into this conversation is knowing that, you know what, there's over 100 years of research that tells us that the way that probably many of us and our parents, and to a certain extent the students, until they maybe kind of figured out what's going on at the middle school and high school, for example, they were used to things like points and percentages. And EBR is different. As you all probably know, or you're learning as board members, it's different. And so the big picture takeaway from all this research is that over 100 years of grading research tells us that when we do use points and percentages, it doesn't actually always tell us what students are learning. Okay? Here's an example. Once upon a time when I was a teacher, I hand out extra credit to my students if they brought in a ream of paper to my class, or Kleenex boxes, all right? That had nothing to do with how much they learned. It's just they did it because I told them to. And so this whole body of research says we should think about doing grades differently. And there's a lot of different ways that schools are doing it, and EBR is one of the ways that school districts are saying we can do better than the points and percentages that we've done before. And so my aim was not to say, are you guys doing it exactly the perfect, awesome way? But instead to take your EBR framework and say, is it working? Are the teachers doing it the way that maybe you say they're supposed to? Are they doing it consistently? And so let's dig in here. I'm going to first share the data collection procedures, just so you all kind of know like how I collected all this data. Then I want to share with you a summary of the findings, and then I also want to share with you some recommendations that I've shared with Dr. Bakenhorst, and it sounds like perhaps he shared that with the administrative team as well. So first, what did I do? Dr. Bakenhorst was awesome. He was my liaison to the school district and said, hey, Dr. Bakenhorst, we need to send out a survey. We need a wide perspective. And so back in January, he sent out a survey to parents and students and middle school and high school teachers. And then, as a result of those survey results, I came back in February, actually in this very room for part of the day, and I did focus groups with teachers and parents and students. And I'll tell you a little bit more about them. And then today, we're sharing all the findings. So we all know that surveys are good. They cast a wide perspective, but sometimes it's good to hear it directly from someone when they're telling it to you. And so that's why I said we got to do more than just a survey. We have to actually talk to people and find out more what they are thinking, teachers, students, and parents. So what was it like? We actually had 281 middle school and high school parents complete this survey. That's actually pretty good. It's a pretty good number of middle school and high school parents that said, yes, I'll take about 10 minutes of my time and complete this survey. That's pretty good. 281 parents completed the survey. Okay? We had 181 middle school and high school students complete the survey. That's also, not all of them, obviously. That's pretty good. A pretty good number of the students at the middle school and high school took the time to complete the survey I sent out. And 46 teachers and administrators at the middle school and high school also completed the survey. That's a pretty good percentage of our middle school and high school teachers. So I share this with you to let you know that while it wasn't everybody that completed the survey, we got a pretty good response rate from casting this wide net and just finding out like, hey, parents, students, teachers, what do you think about this EBR thing? Okay? In the midst of all that, though, again, as I said, it's good to have an outside survey administered, but it's also good to go deeper. And so someone who does educational research a lot, what I know is survey can kind of tell us the what, maybe, but it doesn't necessarily always tell us the how or the why. Now, maybe you have a really, really, really good survey that can do that, but surveys typically give you kind of like surface level information. And so I came back and 14 parents at the middle school and high school. I did 2 separate focus groups for a total of 14 middle school and high school parents, 26 students, 14 staff, teachers, and administrators combined. So about 45 to 60 minutes each, just asked them a lot of different questions. Tell me more about EBR. What are the successes? What are the challenges? And so as a result of talking with all these people and getting all of these survey results, I'm going to try to disseminate all of it in just to a couple of slides, all right? But know that as you perhaps have read your report, there were a lot of charts and graphs on here, okay? A lot of charts and graphs. I looked through pages and pages and pages of charts and graphs, open-ended questions that survey respondents did, and I have pages and down that little folder right down there, pages and pages and pages of notes from interviewing people in the focus group format as well. So what did I learn? What did I learn from the teachers and students and parents at Mount Vernon? Here we go. First, I combined all these results together so not as to overwhelm you. As I talked to Dr. Baker, she says, hey, don't take 3 hours to do this thing. Like, you're going to get bored, and they want the cake by the time you're all done anyway. So just, get cut to the chase. So that's what I do right now is cut to the chase as I combine the survey results and focus groups. Drum roll, here we go. What did we find out? Thanks, appreciate that. Thanks for staying good. Good. The first thing I wanted to know is like, hey, if we're going to ask stakeholders, what do you think about this like EBR thing? Do you even know about it to begin with? That was like had to be the very first question I asked. The very first question. And as it turns out, wow. Our parents, our students, our teachers, our staff, they're very familiar with EBR. So this is the only charts and graphs slide I promised. But you'll notice that many more are saying they're familiar or very familiar with it than not. That's a big kudos, and it speaks to the fact that this is not some mystery thing being done to people, but that they're very well aware of the fact that we're doing something called EBR. So it's a huge thumbs up. Our stakeholders here are very aware of it. Now we can proceed to the other findings because they know what they're talking about when they respond to these surveys and answer questions. So the first big picture question I was trying to figure out is to what extent are the grading practices being implemented with fidelity? Wow. I tell you what, when I was asking teachers especially and administrators, they know a lot about EBR. There were some people around this table right here, like they have a very deep knowledge of what EBR is about. And that speaks highly to your school district. They are very well aware of what this is all supposed to look like, which is a great starting point. That's in contrast to, I've gone to schools before and they're like, they tell us we're supposed to be doing this, or I went to a training once, but I really don't, I have no idea what I'm doing. That's not the case here. And that's a huge thumbs up. That's a huge kudos to the work that's been done with our teachers and administrators here at Mount Vernon. This is all not, rainbows and unicorns though, just so you know, all right? There were, amongst the surveys and the focus group interviews, there was some inconsistency. There were some questions about, hey, why does this teacher have this number of standards, and why in this content area are there this number of things in the grade book? It seems so different to me, maybe as a student or as a parent. Maybe there was a perception by some teachers that maybe they were doing it the same, but maybe amongst the students and parents, they're like, well, this teacher seems to do a lot different than this teacher, so I don't quite understand it yet. And so there's a perception of perhaps inconsistency along the way. What was awesome, though, is that there were just countless quotes of teachers in particular that were like, wow, I am so glad we're doing EBR because I feel like I'm a better teacher now. I'm really more targeted on what my students need to learn, for example. At the same time, even though they were really excited about this, not all of them, most of them, but they also were pretty honest and said, you know what, we've made some really great progress in the past several years, but there are some further improvements that we need to make. We're going to hear about those in just a moment, all right? So again, I feel like we got a really honest assessment from stakeholders about how we're kind of doing with this whole EBR thing here. The second question I tried to answer was, in what ways are we doing this that kind of aligns with why we're doing it? Why are we doing it? Because we want our grades to mean something, to mean that our students have learned the things they're supposed to learn, not just you got some points for extra credit Kleenex boxes. It's because you've learned the things in world history you're supposed to have learned. It's you've learned the things in algebra that you're supposed to have learned. I tell you what, students, teachers were like, wow, this is actually, for the most part, a good thing for us. Teachers were saying, I'm providing a lot better feedback to students. One of your administrators said, let me tell you a story about a couple classrooms I've been in where teachers were just providing fantastic, very detailed feedback to students as a result of doing this EBR thing. Students even said, for the most part, we're aware of what we need to do differently if we're not doing very well. That's a really good thing. That's a really good thing for the students that are soon going to be walking across the stage, right? To know as they go off to the workplace, to the military, to college, that they know how to be someone that knows what they're doing well and where they need to get better. It's a great life skill. I'm guessing you agree with that. On the same token, though, there was kind of a question mark here. If we're talking about grades, we should probably all know how they're determined, right? And so how that final grade is determined seemed to be a question mark amongst a variety of stakeholders. So in EBR, instead of points and percentages, there's these like 1s and 2s and 3s and 4s. And there were some questions about like, hey, what's a 2, what's a 3, but for the most, I mean, it was, you know, it was some teachers were like, oh, I get it, others were not, and some students really understood it. But where the most question marks came was like, tell me more about this final grade thing. I'm not really sure how it's determined. And here's the crazy thing, right? In the old system, just so we're all clear on this, all right? In the old system, how were final grades determined? Percentages. If you got this percent to this percent, you got whatever. But honestly, did we really know how those were calculated either? Computerized system did it for us, right? And so now we have to kind of be able to explain away what the computerized system used to do for us, and so now it's on us as teachers, it's on us as administrators to better explain it, and I'm sure we'll talk more about that here in a little bit. Third thing is that, I tell you what, some parents, I wish I did not record these focus group interviews, but I wish I would have, because there were times where a parent would say, let me tell you about this thing I don't understand about EBR, and then another parent would answer the question for them, right? Right? And so there's some really good learning that took place in these focus groups of what EBR was all about. And so, for example, one of those is one parent would say, oh, I heard that deadlines are a free-for-all in EBR. Another parent's like, that's not the way my kid perceives it. And so, again, just some really great learning that took place. And I'm going to share a recommendation here a little bit that I think can really help more parents understand what EBR is all about. I took a phrase from some previous research in the world of grading practices I think can really help us understand what this is all about. As parents, as stakeholders, we have a confidence in the known. What I mean by that is we know kind of how things used to be when we were in school. And so as a result of EBR, it doesn't always align with what we were used to. And so that can create some dissonance sometimes because it's not the way that we experienced it. Thanks for that head down there, Lane. It's like, we just don't really always know, like, what in the world is this thing? Okay? So I shared the major findings. Again, there's all kinds of charts and graphs and quotes and things that are in here you can dig deeper into. Brass tacks, Townsley. What's going on? What should we be thinking about doing differently or staying the same in Mount Vernon School District as a result of this report that you provided to us and that you shared today? A couple different things. First, I don't want anyone to leave here thinking like this is some, like the ship's sinking or anything like that. It's by no means sinking at all. All right? There are really great teachers doing really great things in this school district. And so I hope that I know many of you interact with teachers, whether you're at the Gary's or whatever it might be, just give them another high five or a handshake. They have worked hard to do this. And I really think we owe it to the staff in our school district to celebrate the great work that they've done so far. And I was just the benefactor of it for an entire day listening to those focus groups, hearing those great things. So I hope that you will reach out to them, whether you're at the hardware store, at Ace, or at Gary's, and just say, hey, I appreciate what you're doing. Secondly, though, I really think it'd be helpful to revisit that final grade conversion. I'm not saying it's wrong, I'm not saying it's right, but there seems to be some misunderstanding about what that final grade conversion is all about. So could me doubling down and saying, is this the way that we want to do it? Is this the best way to do it? Or it might be saying, we're doing it well and we need to better communicate how we're doing it. There's a lot of different ways to kind of take this recommendation here. Third, I'm going to pull a phrase from Educationese, okay? I think it'd be helpful as a school district, as an administrative team, for example, to refine what I call the tight and loose EBR practices. What I mean by that is that EBR, yes, we're trying to get all of our teachers moving in the same direction, but it has to look just a little bit different in art than maybe it does in physical education, than maybe it's going to in mathematics class. All right? That's just the way that grading practices play out. Because the way that the state has written the standards, the list of things that students are supposed to learn, they're different. So we're going to have to say, here's where we agree are the ways we're all going to do it the same. And then here are some fences, if you will, that teachers can work within and say, this is what makes sense for us in our content area. And so I think that'd be really good for our teachers to know or to know again if they don't. And then to a certain extent for our parents to understand that when they're like, well, how come that teacher does it different than that teacher? Hey, that's the fence we're willing to live in here as a school district. Cool. Thanks, Rick. Appreciate that. All right. This fourth one is an interesting one. Within the grading literature out there, there's kind of a positive debate about 21st century skills. So that whole thing about deadlines I mentioned earlier, would you agree that's a 21st century skill? Like we want our graduates to like be responsible and to turn things in on time? Heck yeah, we do. That's what's called a 21st century skill. There's a difference between expecting a 21st century skill and teaching a 21st century skill. You see what I'm saying? Like, it's one thing for my mom to say, when I was growing up, do the laundry, Matt. And I'm like, I don't know how to put stuff in the washing machine. I don't put stuff in the dryer. But if she shows me how to put something in the washing machine, shows me how to put stuff from the washing machine into the dryer, now she can expect me to do it because she taught that to me. And it seems kind of crazy, like, haven't students been taught to turn their stuff in on time? Haven't we taught them how to do X, Y? Some students just have figured it out. Other students, we haven't taught them yet. And so I think it's important for us to carefully consider as a school district, not just maybe reporting it out, but also what would it look like to teach those 21st century skills. And finally, the last one, maybe the most important one for you as board members that represent our community, is to engage parents through some type of what I would call like a parent university or other modality. I know of some school districts where they will do like a combination of in-person and online, like, hey, come and learn more about this thing. It doesn't just have to be about EBR. It could be about the finances of our school district, right? Or whatever the topic is, say, hey, come and learn about this thing. And EBR could be one topic within that. All right? So it could be in person, it could be video, or maybe you're saying, hey, Matt, we got a better idea about how to do it. Whatever it is, it kind of seems like the parents that I talk with, some of them knew a lot about it, others were just like, I've heard about it, but I'm getting my questions answered tonight in the focus group. Well, I'm glad that happened to them, but we honestly don't want a focus group to be the only place they're learning about this. Make sense? So, however we kind of figure out how to do it, is there some way to re-engage our parents as they continue to go through our middle school and high school to better understand all of this? All right. I'm salivating now because I'm thinking of my favorite sweet, salty thing called grading. I love it. Here's a summary statement. It comes from one of the teachers in Mount Vernon. More than anything, I appreciate that we are trying to make grades mean something more than just a total number of points a student manages to accumulate. That's awesome. The teacher would say, we want our grades to reflect how much our students have learned, what they've learned in math class or science class or social studies. That's the aim of all of this EBR thing, and whoever this teacher was absolutely nailed it. All right, I'm excited. I hope you're excited too about grading, more excited than you were a couple minutes ago. What questions do you have, board members? And then I'll turn it to Dr. B.
Can you explain to me how a student that had all fours except for one thing that was a 2 end up with a 2 overall?
That's a good question. I would defer to those that know more than me about that specifically.
A kid, it'd be mathematic. It's not possible for a kid to have like 3 4s and 1 2 and end up with a 2. So
I would agree.
yeah.
So I'm just asking how it happened, I guess.
I'd have to
be more specific.
Yeah, I'd have to see a specific
Are you talking
example.
about standard scores, or are you talking about just a mastery of learning assignments within the standard score?
Yeah.
If you wanna bring that to either one of us, we can sit down and look at it.
Yeah, that's maybe the crux of the question is we do grade checks 2 weeks before the quarter, and then 2 weeks before the end of the semester, in case like what Dr. Townsend was referring to is like we're expecting a computer program to do something that's impossible for us, is that when I go to a mechanic, sometimes they plug into a computer and they give back an answer, but oftentimes they have to go diagnose something, and they have to be the trusted professional that we get answers from in that inquiry of ours, right? And so the same thing has to be true in the classroom as well. So what we do is we get their eyes on, student eyes on it, we get teacher eyes on it, and parents are always double checking as well from a triangular perspective, and we try to make sure to have a detailed look at those things so that those things don't happen 2 weeks before the quarter and 2 weeks before the end of the semester.
So the takeaway, Matt, when you look at number 2, that's still but there's still too many surprises where, gee, I thought I, the student, or a parent was looking at a child thinking, thought they were right on track to get X, but they got Y. Are you still getting a sense that there are still too many cases like Jason has outlined?
I think it's a combination of 2 and 5 recommendations. I think it's a matter of there sometimes may not be an understanding of what the final grade conversion is. And so as a result of that, and I cruised your the EBR website that you all have created. I think there's like a screencast or 2 on there. And some of these scenarios are detailed a little bit, but again, if I hadn't watched those videos, I wouldn't know. So perhaps that might be a topic of parent university, or whatever modality it might be. If we say, here's the final grade conversion that makes sense for us, we would maybe provide examples like that. Remember, Clark, to say, hey, here's a question that often comes up. What in the world is this? How does this number result in this? And that could be a topic of further parent learning.
Did any of the teachers share frustration in that they did the math and it was like, wow, I thought they were cruising along getting 3s and 4s, but it ended up with 2?
No.
Because I think that was an experience that we would have had 3-4 years
I see
ago.
the exact opposite. This is the part as a parent that frustrates me is I see low grades because we do use a computer system that predicts grades. Low grades that at the end rise. So you literally think your kid is doing poorly all year, and then all of a sudden at the end, they got a better grade. So I do think that's definitely a recommendation we need to look at, because it's also difficult for parents that are thinking their kids are not doing well,
Sure.
and then all of a sudden they are.
Sure.
I do have a question that, and there may be an answer. It's not really in your report, because I don't think you were asked to look at it, but I like grading too. But I like, I also like math. So what I wanna know is, because this has been happening for a while now, is there a way for us to be able to tell that it's better? That's a really wide question, but we shouldn't continue to do something if we can't actually show that kids really do know better. Even the answers from that teacher are great, because the teacher believes, well, I would hope they could have told whether kids knew things before they changed to a different grading system. And that to me is what we really should be looking at is, because I've been in education long enough to have seen multiple different things that come and go. And I want us to be able to say, okay, how can we look at success rates, or, I hate standard-based testing as it is, but how can we tell that the EBR system is actually, when our kids graduate, they know more than they did than 10 years ago when we weren't using this system? Because it's not like we had a bunch of failing kids 10 years ago. So, and that's the part that I don't know. I'm assuming, since it's been out there long enough and you're at the university, there's somebody doing studies on that to show that this actually improves performance. That it performs better.
Yep.
And, because that's the part that I want us to be able to, when a parent says, why are we doing this? I want to say, because I can prove to you that your kids are gonna learn more, that they're gonna do better.
Yeah. I'm gonna share a surprising answer to this. This is something that actually just rocked me a few years ago. Dr. Tom Guskey, one of those grading experts I mentioned earlier, wrote a paper in 2022 to try to hammer home this point. He said that when schools change their grading practices, sometimes we want to say, oh my gosh, the ACT scores went up, or the Iowa assessment scores went up. But he says, all we're doing is we're changing our grading practices. What grading practices are, is they are a communication tool, okay? And so the metaphor that I use is not perfect, but once upon a time I went to Europe, and I was in an airport, and I didn't speak the native language. My wife did, and she took the classes on how to speak that native language. I did, and so I was like, what in the world are they saying here? And she had to interpret for me. Once she interpreted for me, then I could understand. All grades are, is they are a communication of how a student is doing. And so if we change the language, we hope that our parents, our students, will better understand what their strengths are and their areas for improvement. Now, to your theory, hang out with me for a second. So grading itself, all it is a communication tool. But to your theory, what we do with those grades that we have, if we use the information from our grade book to better respond to those students who are struggling, or extend those students who are doing well, if we do those things, then we should expect, those stinking test scores, whatever it might be, to go up. Where I have seen some emerging research, for example, is maybe like what I call in the affective domain, I guess you'd say, like how students feel about themselves. If you can imagine a student who before they just weren't getting their stuff done, fail, 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 fail. And at some point in time, it was mathematically impossible for them to do any better. So what do? They quit, they give up. Well, in systems like this, there is a way to say, you know what, I understand that stuff. I gotta work hard to understand it, but I understand that stuff. Grit's a word that gets thrown around sometimes. And so there are some people that are starting to study, is grit, is students' resilience, for example, is that something that may be a positive benefactor of a grading system like this? So I think it's a kind of a hard question to answer in that regard, but I think that there are some things that people are trying to investigate as a result of that.
Mr. Tate, correct me if I'm wrong, but we've done some anecdotal,
Yeah, but
non-scientific
we have
around GPAs
through
especially.
GPAs, we have ACT data, our ACTs, I mean, they're gonna fluctuate always, they're not gonna continually always go up, but our ACTs the last 3 years have gone up, we're the highest we've ever been, 24.8, something like that, which is ridiculously high. The other thing, I'm glad you said that, the clarifying point, like I call this hot tub story here. Jace Tatey and I, my middle son, were this winter, we were sitting out back in the snow in the hot tub, and we were sitting there talking about school, and we went around with all the boys and basically said, hey, what's going well, what's not going well, and keep in mind, they know nothing about that I'm really passionate about this as well, speak to other schools about this as well, and travel and talk to people about this as well, and they could care less. They could really care less about it. And I said, Jace, what's going well? And he says, oh, this is going well, and here's why. And then I go, what's one thing you can improve upon or do better? And he goes, well, social studies. And I said, tell me more. And he says, the standard on sources and evidence, and sources, just primary and secondary sources. And I go, what do you mean by that? And he goes, yeah, I don't always know what a primary source is and a secondary source is, and he goes, I get twos in that for right now. And so, just imagine us back when we were in high school. What would we have been able to say that? I don't think we would. What would we have said? Getting a B. Chapter 2's not going. I just didn't do well in chapter 2. And what would have happened? We would have moved on, and I never would have ever been able to go back to sources and evidence again. And so now he knows that, sees that, and so one of the exit outcomes isn't necessarily achievement as much as it's clarifying exactly what a grade is, but to develop self-efficacy, the belief in and confidence in myself that I can see an expectation and meet that expectation, because their professors will have them, their bosses will have those as well. That's one of our major exit outcomes. Now, do we trick kids into building that into them? Yeah, I mean, they don't always know what self-efficacy is, and they're gonna blow that off when they hear that word, but at the same time, we're trying to get them to see where they're at and grow themselves, because that's what we want them to be, as self-reliant learners along the way. So that is one of our major exit outcomes on there. To Dr. Townsley's point, we have not done a great job of communicating that since year 1 and 2 of what that looked like, where I had morning coffees with every single parent that was invited, or every single parent that was going into 8th, 9th, 10th, and 11th grade, twice a week for 4 to 8 weeks straight, and we just haven't done that since. And so they don't know what that is and how we get to that point along the way.
So maybe that's the study.
That's a great, yeah.
Maybe that is the study to be able to show, because
Great.
at some point we have to be able to show why it's better or why it's not. And that's my whole only real question, is we have to be able to, I mean, it's like anything, you shouldn't keep doing something until you know why you're doing it.
Dr. Townsley, can you even, while you're on that topic, I don't wanna miss this, can you please point out, number 4, like why the nuance of number 4 is, because when we talk about clarifying a grade and we start mixing in a 21st century, maybe talk about the nuance of like, yes, exit outcome and how do we teach that and assess that, but also are we introducing a behavior back in the grade when we were trying to clarify exactly what social studies knowledge they knew, maybe this.
Yeah, so I'm gonna try to answer that question a little bit, but also talk about this. So in elementary school, for example, like my own child, not in this school or somewhere else, they have a standards-based report card where it just says, hey, how well's Johnny, or how well's Caleb, my son, doing in adding? How well's doing in subtracting? I can envision what that report card looks like. There's no rolling it up to a letter grade. And so also on those report cards, like how well does he play well with others, for example. That's an example of a 21st century skill. And so it works a lot, I'll just say it works a lot better in elementary because there is no combining all of those things together. And a crazy metaphor is like, imagine if you went to the doctor and the doctor took your height and your weight and your blood pressure and they just put them all together and said, you're a whatever number or whatever thing, right? It'd be kind of a silly measurement, wouldn't it? And that's kind of what we've traditionally done by combining how well you know fractions and how quickly you turn your assignments in. When we combine those two, we're combining an academic thing or a mathy thing with a 21st century skill thing. And I'm not an educational measurement expert, but we're creating an educational measurement error. Just like if your doctor were to bring all of those things together, they'd be creating an error by telling you something. And so that's why this right here, let me just give you an example. One high school in Wisconsin, this is not prescriptive, just an example. They call it work and people skills. So what they're doing is they're saying, hey, we're still going to report out and assess and teach these work and people skills, but they're not folding it into the letter grade. This is gonna sound crazy, but they treat them very seriously. Okay, so like if there's gonna be kids walking across the stage here soon in Mount Vernon for commencement, and if those students did not have good work and people skills, then they may not get the honor distinctions, for example. Make sense? And so they're creatively figuring out ways to say, here are our top academic and 21st century skill students, by the way that they eventually do it, like on their transcript, or when they walk across the stage, for example. I'm not saying you all should do this, but this school also, if a student continues to have a downward trend in their work and people skills, it impacts their eligibility for extracurriculars in that particular school district. I'm not saying you should do that, but I'm just saying that's a creative ways that schools are figuring out this without trying to just combine it into a letter grade, because that's actually the thing we're trying to get away from when we do these EBR and standards-based practices.
I think the tough part, Jeremy, becomes honestly at the high school level when we have to end it with a grade.
Yes.
If we could just end it with the feedback from each individual standard, and we could say, you know, you're getting a 4, you're getting a 4, you're getting a 2, and you're getting a 3. You fill in what they were, and that were the end of it. I'm not sure what questions there would be, because it would be right there. It's in the end then when the parent or the kid sees it's a B. How did I get a B? Whether that's good or bad for some kids. I got a B.
That's my question. Why is it necessary?
Yeah,
to,
I don't.
to turn numbers into letters. I mean, I understand it makes it easier
Because of
for
him.
some.
And colleges, and you and I.
Yeah, well, and colleges are not all about GPAs and
Correct.
SATs either anymore.
Homeschool kids, what do they do for homeschool kids?
It's also car insurance.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. But I'm just, and I agree that it does get confusing when you're trying, one, to turn a 4-point system into a 5-point system. And you're trying, you want to average it and it's not an average. And so I guess I've always felt that, is it necessary? Is it necessary?
I mean, here's the thing, right?
Do schools not do it?
I know of one
Yes,
school.
you mean not give a grade? I
Yes.
just, okay, that's what
They
you mean,
have-
is it not necessary to
To turn it
to
into.
end
a
it
letter.
with a grade, to turn it to a GPA?
Can I like step off the stage for a second and answer your question? Because I work at a university now, right? Technically, could you all don't do this, right? Don't do this today, okay? technically, could you all decide that we're not going to have letter grades anymore? And our high school transcript is gonna look a lot like the elementary report card? 100% good.
Or portfolio based of
Yeah, so whatever it is, right? So you might be saying right now, what about car insurance? We can figure, I mean, I can't figure that out, but we can figure that out. What about getting into the University of Northern Iowa or Cornell College? Well, to your point, yes, there is a precedent already set for that, and that is homeschool kids, for example, or maybe school somewhere that,
Charter school.
yeah, whatever it might be. And I can provide you with this report. Myself and a few colleagues actually went to Iowa State, UNI, admissions people once upon a time when we asked them that question. And at those universities, we didn't talk to Cornell, for example, or Wartburg, or Hawkeye, or Kirkwood. But their reason for, like, why do we want GPAs? Efficiency.
It's easy.
It's easier. Like, for example, University of Iowa, Iowa State, UNI, they use this thing called the Regents Admissions Index. They put in several different things, it cranks out a number, and that allows them to make more efficient admissions decisions, more quick, efficient decisions. Here's the thing though, right? You guys can imagine this scenario. Don't do this tomorrow, and I can't believe I'm saying this in a public setting, but it's true, okay? If Mount Vernon High School said, we're not giving out letter grades anymore, do you think that Cornell College, Iowa, and Iowa State are gonna start turning down your students for admissions? No way.
Colleges need kids.
You're 100% right. You're 100% right.
So with the,
Don't take this away as like, this guy came in and told you to do that, although I kinda like the idea, but.
We did a survey
yeah.
on this, 100% of our teachers said that they would be a better teacher tomorrow if they got rid of letter grades. And so at the high school a couple years ago, we did that survey.
So with that, when we're talking about colleges and stuff, and we did look at it here, and I don't know if it makes sense or if there's any data out there, but to me, we also need to ask the kids that have gone through this and are already in the real world, whether it be college or the workforce or a trade. Did this work for you? Because now you had to make a transition from this to what UNI is, to what a trade school is or something. So that's the piece I'm looking at. If it works and they all say, yeah, it's no big deal, and we thought it was great, bottom line, this is a small thing to the rest of their life, right?
I can't speak to Mount Vernon, but I can speak to that topic in general. Actually Dr. Tom Gusky and myself and another researcher did a similar study to what you're talking about. There's only one university, granted, but we asked students at the, for end of the first semester, freshman year, these are students that went to standards-based like schools, and we specifically asked them like, hey, how was the transition? And they're like, yeah, good transition, that's the gist of it. Here's our aha. No matter what grading practices Mount Vernon High School uses, this is a take-home point to share with your stakeholders. No matter what grading practices you all use, your students are going to have to adjust when you go to university. Here's why. Some professors only do a midterm and a final, that's it. Some provide points for homework, some don't, right? So like, regardless of what we do here, they're going to adjust. And that was kind of like one of our takeaways from that specific research study that we did, is that yeah, it's actually, no matter what we do, students are going to have to transition. But I think it would be a good idea to talk with your graduates a year or two out, bring them back over, the holiday break, for example, do a panel. Maybe record that panel, make it part of your parent university. That'd be a really great idea.
That might be a great approach, because we've always tried surveys and we failed them.
Yeah.
So, but come on back over a holiday break.
We can't get
Free drinks.
I don't wanna keep this here all night, but I do wanna go down a rabbit hole. So we stop issuing grades, which you didn't say, I realize.
Thank you.
How do we determine when somebody didn't pass?
For credit bearing purposes?
Right, because we still have to have graduation requirements. So, I mean, if we stop issuing grades,
We still have
we still have to have pass or fail or something.
You could do something like if a student has to have, if they have a 1 or a 2, then they don't pass the class or something like that. You can still get that.
So we have grades off all the way up through 5th, 6th, and now 7th is not gonna have them, correct? And then 8th grade will turn them on at the quarter, I believe. And then they'll be turned off the quarter for high school, so they're getting kind of used to the concept. But even if you showed us a collection of just scores that could look at that and tell you immediately what their standard score would be.
Good question.
It's hard because like I said, this journey's been about 8 years now. It was just pre-me when it started. And you started with the kids who had one foot in both worlds. Traditional grading systems versus moving more to a standards-based approach. And even for a while there, we had both in play because not everyone had been trained in the standards-based approach. And I remember having a student group my first year where there was a lot of talk. Well, I had my standards teachers and I had my traditional teachers. And so you had to get through that first, and then this little thing called COVID came, and then kind of swept. But now they know no other way. So I don't know if they have anything to compare it against to see. Basically, it's gonna be, were you prepared for school? And it's hard to then correlate that the reason they were prepared was because we use a standards-based approach. That's a hard thing. You're trying to prove a very difficult thing. I agree, but does it work?
So, Dr. Tunsley, from your experience, is there, schools or processes that you've seen that, as far as a timeline, it's been, 8 years you said? That, okay, at 10 years, they evaluated it, said this is working, it's not working, what's the next step, right? Have you seen or worked with?
Yeah, these are definitely the immediate next steps that I would recommend for.
How about like a timeline, putting a
Yeah.
timeline to some of that?
Yeah. I honestly think, in my opinion, these are all things that could happen in the next school year. And my guess is maybe some of them are just a matter of, for example, if there has been parent meetings in the past, resurrecting those in a way, I think that would be a really good thing. I don't think that this would be something that would take, any longer than a school year.
I think two is really interesting though, because you listen to two different board members / parents give you two different sides of the coin. One where the system seemed to fail in a situation where the end result was a final grade that appeared to be lower than what the data supported, and one where, wow, I've been all over my kid for 4 months to get it going, and he's gonna fail, and all of a sudden he got a B. So yeah,
Well,
there's just.
See, Dr. Bainers, that's actually sort of the one of the things that stood out to me was why number 2, but I feel like it's more than just the final grade conversion, is that the inconsistencies, and this is other stuff I've heard from community members too, is not just the final grade conversion, but in how some of the teachers are administering the standards or assessing the standards, that there seems that students feel that there's inconsistencies there. And I feel like I saw some of that in the report, I can't think of exactly, but I think I feel like that would sort of speak to some of that too, is that feels like an action item. We need to be able to make sure, not just are the parents getting, not just kind of the number 5, can we educate the parents, but teachers seem to know what it should look like, right? And saying this is what it should look like, but your question of, is it really being implemented with fidelity? Are the teachers consistently across the board actually, and maybe that's sort of that typo set, are we actually doing that? And then that leads to, you add to that this then final grade conversion, that then how we even answer the question of, is this helping? Are our students actually learning what we want them to learn if our way of assessing that is inconsistent? And so that feels like a really big one to me that we need to address.
You're right. I probably should have written a little bit more detail on this one on the slide here. That's what this is really all about, is we have to decide where are parameters for implementing this. And it might mean that we have to, for example, get some departments or some teachers that maybe they've been kind of veering a little bit farther over this way, and maybe help them be a little bit closer to where we want them to be. Again, in my experience with the teachers that I talked with, they were excited to do that. Like, they were not like, oh, I don't want to do that. But maybe one I can think of, but the majority of them were like, hey, this is a good thing, and I'll do a better job if supported in time, and they did feel supported so far. But maybe the best way to say it is they felt a lot of support early on, and it's kind of plateaued now for a while. And that might be the best way to describe maybe the parent communication as well, is it just kind of seems like maybe it's plateaued, because there were some parents who had, like seniors that they could tell me about, yeah, I remember when somebody that in the school district was telling me about this once upon a time, but I haven't heard anything for a while from them. And so that's where I kind of got this plateau in my mind. And I think that's maybe a parent and a teacher thing to a certain extent, so I would agree with that.
You know, I can firmly say that one of the reasons that we moved to an evidence-based reporting or a standards-based system was to put forth the best effort we could to try to be more consistent. You guys have no idea.
Yeah, I'm gonna go there.
You have no idea how grades were calculated before. You thought you did. I'm serious. You thought you did. You didn't know that one teacher's grading scale was a B plus at 94 and another teacher's grading scale was a B plus at 74. Like, you didn't know that. All you knew was the end grade. You didn't know that one teacher gave a point every day for a kid that came in and either raised their hand or didn't raise their hand. Like, you just don't talk today. You're earning points in my class because they were so disruptive. Okay? Like, there were things like that, and I'm not saying that's Mount Vernon. I'm saying that's public education. That's what those percentages. You guys all had a comfort level where whatever your comfort level was with what your kids' grades were. Like, if you were, hey, if my kids, as long as they get B's, that's okay. So you didn't care so much about how they got the B. It's just if they came home with that B. But it was incredibly inconsistent. And so we're trying. Do we have a long ways to go? I am with you completely. But it's the first attempt at trying to get there.
I think the challenge is, how do we prove that we're implementing it with fidelity, and what do we do if it's not being implemented with fidelity?
That's a good, really good question. I think one of the things I'll speak to, and I'll take most of the responsibility for the inconsistency there and how we got there, was with the training aspect of it. There was so much being asked of our teachers and our staff when we made the changes over the course of those years, and they went through the trainings and everything that came with it. And part of that is that when you determine tight and loose and you're asking for a lot, we were tight with a lot, we were tight with a lot, we were tight with a lot. And then we gave them some freedom within their own classrooms to say, like, hey, you're gonna have to live with it and make some adjustments from there. And after the first year or two, we stopped, we didn't have course descriptions and rubrics constantly being turned into us because they've already been created. And they just started creating them on their own then at that point because they were used to doing that. And so Michelle and I weren't able to look through all of those, or Tanya and I were not, actually Andy Hawker at the time, we're not able to look through all of those at the time. And so admittedly, that falls back on us from that perspective to say, like, in the full disclosure of trying to be, okay, give them some freedom, vest a lot of them, trying to be a good administrator at that point. Some of that gets down some rabbit holes, and then this is where we're at, several years later.
Just a comment and a question. First of all, thank you for doing this and having them do this. I thought for a while this was important because I didn't think there was any way we can make a change like this and have nailed it, and then have it just be perfect. And I had to fight a lot of my own biases as a parent, and I agree with a lot of what you said, Steve. I can help ABCs, but I can think back in cases, I'm sure we all can, to a final, why did they get an A and I got a B and everything, and it wasn't clear, and we make it like it is completely clear, and it's not. And it's the same way outside of college. I had to evaluate people who work for big companies. They change the assessments all the time, and where I came from is it really doesn't matter what the system is. It's the communication where whoever's being evaluated understands what the rules are, and that person who's giving the rule has some consistency. But it's not ever going to be perfect. Right. So with that said, but we can work toward that. Right. I guess the question is more for everybody else. With this, what are we going to do next? And maybe, because you're leaving, that's not for you.
I propose, and correct me if I'm not saying this right, but, is it fair to say now that you guys have seen some of his recommendations and revisiting all this, to say, okay, these are our goals in the next year, and share them, and then say, at that time, we want to revisit that and see how we did, to make sure the process is moving forward and we're just not having this conversation, and, I mean, is that something that is fair to ask or fair
At
to?
the high school level, we actually already started that. We shared the report, on Wednesday during the early out. We sat in here and hashed it over for over an hour with the high school teachers, and then they filled out, gave us some feedback on that. We still need to get through all that feedback, but really what we're asking them is how do we wanna grow and how do we wanna become better? And what are you seeing within here on the direction that we need to go and how we need to make it, what's tight, what's loose? So we've asked those questions, we've gotten some data, and we're gonna put together the plan that as soon as school's out, as a lead team, and figured out the direction that we go for our professional development.
You can
or
see a
professional
T-chart
learning next year.
right now, a T-chart, right, on the left, these 5 things, for example, you know, maybe halfway through the school year, whatever it might look like, what's our progress towards that?
Yeah.
It'd be a great way of kind of some mutual support for teachers, but also making sure we get it done.
I guess one other thing that, made me think of, that I'm sure you have, and you don't need to explain it, but I thought for either a teacher or a new family moving in, this would be really confusing. I'm sure we must have a way to get them onboarded, but that, to me, this has to be a continuous thing, cause that's happening all the time.
Yep.
And I don't think it's something you can just get kind of on your own.
Did you have a question?
Yeah, I have one more thing, cause I have a comment, I guess, first. Hey, that wasn't my student. I have one student that's really good with EBR, and another student that I don't know what I'm gonna do with. But that's my problem. I had a few teachers reach out to me after you guys shared those surveys, and they're just, I guess, frustrated with homework not being completed, but then they're being asked to, I guess, not have a grade for that, but then being asked to make time to do a reassessment or something else for students that failed because they didn't put in the work initially because they knew they could retake the test. Is there any way to fix that problem, I guess?
I mean, if you want me to address that right now, is number one, nobody's required to give a reassessment on like the same test. We reassess standards. So it's cyclical about always coming back to the standard, and they get an opportunity to reassess on the standard, not on the test. So at the end, we'll have 3 to 5 pieces of data on a standard that they've been able to reassess on that. So
I might have misheard
It's okay.
test versus
It's
standard,
okay.
but yes, they're just saying, so reassessing the standard, I guess, is probably how they phrased it.
It's just,
So,
it's Dr.
It's
Townsend,
big-
you wanna take a stab at that?
I'd say 50 words or less to describe
Yeah,
what the
so-
latest thinking is on the homework dilemma.
Yeah, so the idea is that, the reassessment, to use a phrase you mentioned, is not typically on like a daily assignment. It's on an overarching, like, hey, I still understand primary and secondary sources. And so maybe they took a test or they did a project on that, and they still have demonstrated understanding of that. And so they're going to provide another opportunity to demonstrate understanding of it. So the weird metaphor is I didn't do very well at the driver's license test one day, so I have to go home and study the book, and then come back the next day and try to pass the driver's license test again. The irony there is that if I fail it the first time and I pass it the second time, they don't average the 2 scores on my driver's license, they just get my driver's license, right? And so that's the idea also behind EBR, is that we want you to get the driver's license if you can show me that you know how to drive. We want you to understand the primary and secondary sources if you do that. Typically in schools that do this, it's not a free-for-all, so there's some steps that the teacher and the student need to take. And so I can understand where maybe you're hearing that a teacher's like, oh my gosh, I have to, work with that student. I don't know the details of that scenario, but one thing that I think is pretty clear, if we were to put all of the books that are written about this, they would say that the student needs to go through several steps before they're able to do that. And so if the student, for example, didn't do the primary and secondary source homework one day, and then they bomb it on the test, guess what we're gonna ask them to do first? Go back and do the one you didn't do before. That makes sense, right? And so like this idea of a kid that can't do anything, that all of a sudden gets this magical second shot, is either a mythical misunderstanding, or it could be it's either a myth, or it's a misunderstanding of where he wants to land within our tight and loose EBR practices. So it's very possible it's happening, but it shouldn't be, and so that's an opportunity for us to get back, as Board Member Meyer said, to say, how can we make sure we're all doing it to a certain extent the same way.
And that's the dilemma with homework, it should be, it should be quality practice for the
Yes,
next
yeah.
day, or the next, in the unit, or just, it's doing some serious soul searching on homework, which I think is under number 3. If you continue to give if you give bad homework, A, you're gonna get either bad results, or B, you're gonna get kids who don't do it. So if it's so integral to mastering the standard,
It has to be connected.
they'll do it. If they don't see the
Has to be
connection, they
connected.
will not do it. I think that's a deeper conversation that teachers need to take a real inward look on
Right.
their homework practices.
I think, yeah, Jason, what you're asking is a nationwide question that's being asked. I have an email hold up saved in my inbox from Kentucky, Arizona, Knoxville, South Dakota, and everywhere in between. So there's about 10 of us on here that they emailed some people and just said, I'm having this issue. Kids are saying like they're just not showing up, they don't wanna take it that day, and I'm like, they have to take the exam, right? I mean, they have to do this at some point, and if we're saying like, they can have another chance, like what does this look like to hold them accountable? So to your point, like one of the things that we can do a better job of that we haven't done, we haven't not given our teachers resources to say, if you wanna retake this, here's the steps that you have to do to retake this. Your homework needs to be turned in. You need to come in for a reteaching of this to us, so I can ensure that you might have mastery. At that point, you can earn another shot at this. So that's back on the student as well for them to, is that what
You're
you're?
exactly right.
Yeah.
There shouldn't, those steps ought not to be exactly the same, just to be clear, not exactly the same for math and social studies and PE. But every student should be able to walk into a class and say, what are the steps? And for example, some schools might say, no matter what content area you're in, you have to go back and complete that daily assignment in class or outside of class to be eligible to go back and do that. You have to meet with the teacher, whatever that looks like in math, might look different than PE, but you have to meet with the teacher, for example. So we can create some type things that all teachers are gonna require students to do, for example, in that instance, but make it a little bit different about what that looks like from math to science to.
Comes out of fairness and consistency.
Yeah.
How do we make sure that the teachers feel that it's fair and consistent across the board?
Tim, Michelle and I are actually, we've been meeting a little bit with we believe that we should start with our why document and make sure that's really crystal clear on the why aspect of it. And then what are our practices that we're doing to support the why document? That's kind of what we're working on right now. I have pulled up, it's called why UBG practices. And kind of go from there. So we've already started on that already. We've met with our PD groups there, but we knew we need to revamp our website and have clearer steps now that things have changed along the way. So we have plans to work on those things here this summer especially.
I think having some goals and
Yeah.
outlines and then being able to share that with everybody and then revisit it a year later, whatever, is making all this work.
One of the big questions I have, and I don't know Dr. Townsley's answer to this, I probably knew a lot of the answers before he came up here. But number 4, Dr. Townsley, that's an important one for some of our teachers and what that looks like. As this board gives us direction, do you ever recommend that be included into a final grade for a class?
With one exception, the answer is no. There's one exception. If this itself is one of the content area standards, let me give an example. If we were to go on the state of Iowa list of all the standards for math, science, social studies, for example, there are a couple of content areas, like career and technical education is one.
Journalism.
Yeah,
timeliness, right?
yeah, so there are, like, if it's in the content area standards, then that would be an instance where it would want to count towards the final academic grade, make sense? So like, if we're teaching kids how to do deadlines in journalism, for example, we're gonna teach them how to do that, and we're also gonna assess them how to do that, but it's because the state says we should do that.
So what about if you were to combine the 2 questions with that to number 4? So instead of looking at it as 21st century skills, you look at it as sort of like student responsibility. So as an example, you want to reassess this, that you turned in blank because you didn't want to study and you wanted to go have a good time with your friends last night. So there's a student 21st century skill of your responsibility of what you need to do before you get to reassess. It's not part of your grade necessarily, but you don't necessarily get to, a teacher shouldn't have to take their one student every prep period, because this one wants to come in and relearn this because they didn't wanna do it when it was new. So I think there needs to be a sort of a combination of that. It's not necessarily the grade, but there has to be some responsibility on the student for that reassessment. We can't just put it all on the teachers. There has to be some hoop to jump through when I might have been one of those students that decided I just wasn't gonna study for something.
I will just say, I don't think things are all, or we all know, it's not all black and white, that I do, there are some good teachers doing some good things out there that we all have our own experience in our households, where I hear, oh, I don't have any homework. But then I turn around and see flashcards being created, things wrong, that somehow a teacher has made them understand, unless you do these things, you're not gonna get a good grade. So I like how number 3 is worded, and I hope we have a task force to do it, because I wanna give those good teachers that flexibility to tap into that, this is what you need to do. But then also help maybe the others who feel, gosh, I have to do this reassessment because I'm being told that maybe you don't have to do that, because the kid deserves to get a 1 sometime.
Here's a simple way to put this all in the big picture. This is all a waste of time if we don't do 1 through 5 this year. Why did we do it?
Exactly.
Why do we do it if we're not going to commit in building goals, district and building goals around that? And we've wasted time and money. And so this isn't a choice in my opinion. I got no dog in this hunt, but that should not be a choice.
It's easy for you to say.
I'm saying,
These 5 things.
This is really empowering. Like,
and-
I feel empowered by it. I really do. I don't feel attacked or like undermined with anything. I feel like supported that we can go do a better job of what we were trying to do. I feel hugely supported by this.
That's kind of the value of any audit, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it, that.
Yeah, the one area I can tell you is I mean, number 4 is a major deal. I'm telling you, like, you asked 100% of our teachers, who said that I need this in order to make them do what I want them to do. And we're trying to say, like, my initial response, if you had asked me 7 years ago when we started this, I'll move districts because that's not what I believe in. I mean, that's what I'm saying, like, I don't believe in putting behaviors into grades. Our whole gig is like, if you wanna hold your kid accountable because he stayed up too late, you tell him. You want to do homework, like, you tell him. Tell him what you wanna do, but like, as far as us reporting out to parents, we're getting back into the muddy percentages, like, well, homework's included, and he showed up on time, he turned it in on time, and yes, he knows a little bit about World War II in there. We don't want that in there. We wanna say, like, no, this is your content knowledge in history for your history score. And let me also tell you, your son is not turning stuff in on time. Okay, let me take care of that one, you know, so.
In the interest of time, board members, do you have any more questions, comments?
Just to your follow-up, that's exactly what I was trying to say, you just did it a lot better. So what do we do to make sure that as a board, we're holding ourselves accountable as the building leads? What's that look like? What's the next step?
When you do your goal setting in July or whenever, it's a priority. Basically, you're giving marching orders to the administration to execute a plan to do these things. You make it a high priority and then you basically are telling them.
Would you like our feedback on that before you
Yeah.
set those, like to say
Yes.
like, hey, here's what our plan is with these, and then we can send those to you and you can.
Exactly.
Yeah,
That'd
you're-
be helpful.
Well, and you guys
We're
always do your
assessing goals.
goals too, right?
Yeah.
And I think we're talking, but that might be something to consider for next year. Here is.
Yeah.
Our goal.
Cause right, in sort of timeline, we're assessing the goals from the last year tonight, but we are then setting goals, we said after July 1st, right?
I would say, yeah, after you have it to do.
So.
Person, and by the way,
Something
Mr. Lehman
between
was
that.
going to be here tonight, but his wife had strep throat on her birthday. So he couldn't make it.
That would be great.
I just wanna reiterate a couple things. First, like, I think it's a great idea that we keep tabs on this, to Dr. Batenhorst's, point, like, we put a lot of time and investment in this. I've enjoyed coming back to Mount Vernon to be a part of this, of course, but there was a lot of time that was invested in this report and all of the questions that you all have raised. So I think that's really like, an important thing. Secondly, I just add that, even though I said this could be done in 1 year, it's still going to require time and support for our administrative team and for our teachers.
It can be started in 1 year.
Right.
Yeah, I mean,
I don't know if it can be done in 1 year.
yeah,
It can
we're
be started.
making some good
It's
progress
just
on
done.
these things.
It is now.
It's always evolving.
Yeah, Yeah, and I maybe just wanna I'm not gonna go back to this slide, but I also just don't wanna lose this in the conversation if the newspaper's here, whatever, there's really good things going on, okay? There's really good things going on, and we're talking about refining, yes, not refining as in just doing it there's legitimate things we have to do, but there's really good things going on here, and that's the place that we're at multiple years into it. And so we should be celebrating the fact that we're here today, and that we're doing a great job, but yet not lose track of the fact that we can still do even better. So, again, kudos to you all for being a part of this process. Thank you again, Dr. Bakenhorst, for inviting me to be part of it.
I think you probably, I should have said it in the intro, but, Dr. Townsend is truly one of the foremost experts in this field in the country, and he has I think the number one god of grading and standardization is Tom Gusky, and he has the hotline to Tom Gusky, so, they do a lot of work together, so we're getting, this isn't just some former Mount Vernon chump that's here giving us
I still have my Gary's little tag though.
This guy
Well, you're a chump.
Yeah, I know.
You have a Gary's tag.
All right.
Thank you.
And before we move on, I think we need a 5-minute recess.
Cake.
Cake while you're at it.
That's what you need.
Cake. We'll have the recess, we'll have a piece of cake, and then we'll come back.
Good.
Propelling students to new heights.
Did your phone beep the sun?
There's a little app you can slide it over. Okay.
Yeah, it's kind of a fancy name for being responsible, working together, doing things on time. They're all skills that we want our students to have. But traditionally, here's the best way to say it, we've penalized students when they don't do it, you didn't turn something in on time, so I'm gonna penalize you.
Had the regional Pepsi guy.
But we haven't necessarily taught them how to get better at it.
Why they would scan.
Or, yeah, sure, or why it's important. Great point, yeah. We would never do that. We would never just have a kid show up on the first day and they don't know fractions and say, boom, you don't know fractions. You do that. No, we would teach them fractions. And so just we would do the same thing for students that
Father Bacon would hand me your grade and ask whether or not you wanted to take the final.
penalize them.
And he said, I had a C, and I said, I'll take it, Father. And walked
I'll
out.
do it, just the guys who are in from college in freshman year.
I've never turned down
So,
cake.
mom was still doing soccer, right? Now, eventually, we taught him soccer. That's a skill. But no one ever taught him. So he had to do it. It's a good thing to have as a college Hey, I know, I'm just, it's just a phrase, Yeah, I think it comes from so, the state of Iowa Yeah.
Why do we call it life skills instead of employability skills or life skills?
Honestly, every state calls it something different, that's just what Iowa calls it. It's
The Iowa, like.
State of Iowa.
State of Iowa.
I don't know.
Yeah, so the Iowa Board of Education, yep.
No.
If you educate.iowa.gov. Their list of like what students know in math, reading, science,
It's a game. I had donated.
You donated that much?
Donated to the back. Have your own.
Actually, it should be, maybe have not always done this before.
Right.
I don't have any problems with the pressure on me.
That's really cool. I understand.
Is it good from White Tree Bakery, the pastry in town? I haven't tried it. I haven't finished about everything else.
Yeah, well, let's see here. So Chris talked about the science teacher, he said, hey, when did you teach mitosis? Which is like a cell thing. They could go, they could have a lesson plan, look at it, say, this day I taught mitosis, 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 and this day I gave students an assessment, a test. And if you ask many science teachers and say, hey, when did you teach responsibility? There wouldn't have been lessons on responsibility, there wouldn't have been a project specifically
Well.
The only reason I backed up a bit
sometimes they don't have the benefit of looking down the road and saying,
Well, he kinda got out of wrestling when he was younger. But then he got back into it.
Actually agree with you that would be great if parents did teach those.
He had a lot more friends in older grades. My wife and I go round and round about this.
And I'm like, this is a quarter, this is a no. And I'm like, no, this one says one down. Do you know who Susan B. Anthony is? And he's like, oh, it doesn't matter. I'm like, no, you can't be too much wrong. And he's like,
Here's the.
he was just confused.
anyway, it's not like.
Cameron and Summer are home.
So within, this is what you're saying, within 21st century skills, civic literacy, employability skills, basic literacy, health literacy, employability skills is the specific. So your employability skills, these are things like.
So I'll brag my results over, if I see him, I'll say something, but I didn't wanna make it worse, so.
Manage results, confidence appropriate. Agree to disagree to respect listen for decision making, follow direction, works independently or as part of a team.
We try to eat outside as much as we can.
Those are examples. Actually, I agree with you. I think it would be awesome if all of our students came to the educational system and had those skills in place, but I think they all do. So that would be a question I better have teachers here answer. This would not be two instead of. This is something. All of those things are just really straightforward. This is
And I mean, it's only good.
Yeah, so like I think from my perspective, if I were just to ask a teacher, like a math teacher, like, hey, could you tell me where you taught Pythagoreans to? They could point the lesson plan out where they taught Pythagoreans students to a test of Pythagorean students. And if I asked them, where did you teach responsibility? I'm sure they would be able to point where they're there.
But, I mean,
Yeah, that's
that,
again, this is what the Iowa Board of Education says. That's why it's listed on the website. Actually, do you have a?
I guess that would be, it's not true enough, not. We're still going over that part. For a while.
They're still grading carries not to check out.
Yeah.
No, it's just an and. Just like we'd say, we want students to learn math and science and social
We were
studies
discussing.
and reading and writing.
We're speculating.
That would be in the larger package.
Oh, you're in Silver Park, that wasn't it?
Yeah, I would like to get mad around here for another 2 or 3 hours. Thanks again. All right, we'll call the meeting back to order. That was a very good discussion, thank you all for taking it seriously enough to come up with this stuff.
hey, Rick, I was just saying, that's what we're supposed to talk about board meetings, guys. Those of you that are.
This is a lot more fun.
That's the board meeting stuff that we hope we get to talk about, not what we've been doing for the last few months, but I know the other's necessary, but I was just talking to Christie about that, like, these are the discussions that,
Well, and we used to do that,
and we still will.
so yeah, well, that is good. That's what we're supposed to do. Every once in a while, I have to stop and in my own mind, I have to remind myself, I've been, as a board member, you're given a lot of responsibility for what we're doing here. And not just the money part of it, but what we just dealt with. And, we've got parents that, voted us into this position because they thought we could do a good job of managing it. So, it's important that we understand what the hell we're doing. That kind of a presentation helps us do a better job. So that's good. Okay, and part of that is setting school goals.
So the principals are going to give a brief update on where things stand with their academic, behavioral, and cultural goals for this current school year. Some of those will still be ongoing because some of them do talk about performance on the ISAS, the state assessment. But they'll give you just a brief overview of where things have stood, which they did with the SIAC group a month or so ago. So whoever wants to go first, go first.
Bob said he wants to go in the middle.
Okay? Go figure.
Kate said I go first.
Say what I said.
All right,
Hey, he said brief.
we're gonna do it. So we have, all of us have an A, B, C goal, which is A stands for academic, B is behavioral, and C is cultural. I'm gonna speak to, well, the academic's gonna be super brief because it's really contingent and revolved around the ISASPs, which we just took, but we don't have results back. So as part of the work of the staff in improving its focus on assessment and decision-based or data-based decision-making, Mount Vernon students will see improvements of 5% or better in growth scores in all academic areas as measured on the ISAS. So when we get our state assessments results back, we will look and see whether that
We'll get those when.
early next year.
No, we'll have access to them as early as next month, but they get the full reports usually in August. So you always get, the ISAS review is always in September. That's the September board meeting. We have by then, can interpret it by then and everything. And what he's saying too is, we get proficiency scores, how proficient do they score, but we also get growth scores. How did they grow from year to year? To us, that growth piece is more important than the proficiency. We score off the charts, you know, we're some of the highest in the state with proficiency scores. How do kids grow from year to year?
So I'm gonna speak to the cultural goal, and then Matt is gonna speak to the behavioral goal. So the cultural goal, the school will implement, this is something that I developed over the course of last summer, based on some Every Student Succeeds Act, which is called ESSA. Kind of in work with Michelle. School will implement the LINK plan. LINK stands for Learn, Involve, Network for Kids. So I wanted to implement what I call the LINK plan to increase the capacity of staff, which will increase student engagement and achievement. Teachers will provide student engagement data from their observations in their classrooms and providing that data to the ESSA leadership team. Now there's more acronyms, and I'm gonna go through them. I'm gonna try to do a good job of helping you understand those. But what I really wanted to do was develop a system that was not contingent upon a person. So we talk about that a lot here recently. If I were to not be there, or if I were to step out, could the system still run itself? So we wanted to develop a system where it could run itself. So what we really did is we worked hard to set up a professional learning calendar that was ongoing. Every Wednesday we have some type of professional development at the high school. It's either an early out Wednesday or it's a PLC Wednesday. Early out Wednesdays are all staff. PLC Wednesdays are just staff in their own departmental PLC. So we set up a calendar that would allow them to know, look ahead and see what was coming. And then I met every other Tuesday with our departmental PLC leaders to talk about what was happening on those Wednesdays, how things were going on those Wednesday PD. The focus, though, this is the key part, the focus of those Wednesdays were to be to analyze their classroom formative data and create IWIN, which stands for What I Need. So each individual student trying to analyze what each individual students need. So analyzing their classroom formative data and creating IWIN plans for kind of two ends of the spectrum students, honestly. And one of them I feel like we're doing pretty well, and one of them I don't feel like we're doing pretty well. Two ends of the spectrum are struggling students and are students that already got it, whether we're there or not. Okay, so we want to analyze our data that's happening in our classrooms. We want to create formative assessments, and then we want to have those discussions on Wednesdays. We want to have that data discussion with our departmental experts. They don't all teach the same classes, and in some cases, nobody in that department teaches the same classes, but they all teach the same content. So I want them to be having discussions about their content and what they're teaching. I want them to bounce ideas off of each other based on their formative data, and create I-win structures for kids that are struggling or they've already got it. And then the last thing that they talk about on those Wednesdays were the social and emotional needs of their students and how they could best meet those student needs. So we're going to analyze all of that actually in about a week when we get together and we fill out what's called, another acronym, a SAMI. That is there's an acronym within this. And it's a self-assessment of MTSS data. So MTSS is a multi-tiered system of support. I know it's so we're gonna analyze kind of how this structure worked for us, and two of our goals within the SAMI, so our self-assessment, were one area that was low was leadership. So I felt like I needed to do a better job of putting the structure together, and then holding people accountable, not iron-fisted holding people accountable, but being a leader that was visible. We showed up to on PLC Wednesday. The leadership team spread out, and we didn't observe PLCs. We were just more active in what was going on, being a part of those discussions. and we're just gonna analyze whether that became better or whether we still have work to do. So that was identified through the state, through as being a targeted school in terms of our special education population. But we really needed to analyze our entire system, and that's what came out of our entire system was we needed to have more structures in place that wasn't a person contingent, but was a system, and now we just wanna keep this system going. Okay, Matt, I'm gonna turn it over to you for academic, or for behavioral. Do you wanna read this, or do you have it?
I know, yes.
You got it, okay.
Behavioral was increasing, students' attendance, and one of the things we're really graded upon, really is, on the Iowa report card next year is, chronic absenteeism, and so that will be, that's 10%, absenteeism across, a school year, basically. So if there's 180 school days, 18 days, if they miss more than 18 days, that's chronic absenteeism. And so, one of the things we track is our team meets, every week on every Tuesday at 10 a.m. And then we get together and we look at, students who are, falling through the cracks there, and we constantly, update and look at kids as they progress with attendance issues, and we have conversations with them, and so that we have that multi-tiered system of support there, that with like a greater system of safety nets for our kids now that we have eyes on it at all times, and trying to capture, those before they get too bad along the way and just fall between the cracks. And so, lots of conversations with parents and kids and talking with those, and this is a nationwide issue. I've seen reports as low as 70% of the kids attending 90% of the time is kind of the nationwide, kind of where they're seeing a lot of the nationwide attendance. So I'm thankful that we are at 91 to 92% of our kids attending 90% of the time. So we are above that metric significantly, which is a really big deal. So I'm really excited about that. Of course, we see some major dips in during the sickness phases, there's some really big dips. So that's why the nurse is a part of that team, along with our counselors and myself are part of that team of 4. And so from that data, we have, we're analyzing that data and figuring out new ways like, okay, we can get kids here more by doing X. And so we have some new data we're looking at, and also just trying to help keep teachers sane, because one of the big questions is how much can a kid really truly miss before they shouldn't be allowed to pass the class, right? I mean, like, can they miss 50% of the class? I mean, but even though they're passing, but it's like, well, they haven't taken all the assessments and they've been gone 50% of the time. Like, should they be able to pass, from us as a school district, are we willing to say a kid can still pass even though they've only been here 50% of the time? And of course, there's different things that play into those things, but I think we've kind of arrived at, if a kid's missing more than 25% of class, we're having some serious conversations about whether they should probably retake that class. So there's some things that we are putting into place next year to help further increase attendance, since it'll be graded, and we believe our #1 foundation, just be here, get involved. Good things happen to you when you're here, when you're involved, and you're present. Because there are lots of great teachers who care about you and are great role models for you being in school.
So you're gonna hear that the middle school has the same goal, so in March, the New York Times did an article on this. I'm going to read just a very quick part of the very beginning. It says, in Anchorage, Alaska, affluent families set off on ski trips and other lengthy vacations with the assumption that their children can keep up with schoolwork online. In a working class pocket of Michigan, school administrators have tried almost everything, including pajama day, to boost student attendance. Across the country, students with heightened anxiety are opting to stay home rather than face a classroom. In the 4 years since the pandemic closed schools, U.S. education has struggled to recover on a number of fronts, from learning loss to enrollment to student behavior. Perhaps no issue has been more stubborn or pervasive as a sharp increase in student absenteeism, a problem that cuts across demographics and has continued long after schools have reopened. Nationally, an estimated 26% of public school students were considered chronically absent last year, up from 15% prior to the pandemic. So when we were having the earlier discussions with standards-based approaches, I didn't say anything about this attendance issue because I knew it was going to come up in this part. But that is a major factor as well when we look at those kids who are struggling, no matter what grading and reporting system we have. This is a lesser issue for us, but it's a huge issue for us. And so we know we need to tackle it head on. The good and bad of the legislature putting more attention to it is, the good is they're paying attention to it. The bad is I'm fearful that some of their guidelines are punitive and we're going to punish districts who don't get their attendance up as opposed to offering resources to get attendance up. But, we saw the trends prior to COVID, and it had a lot to do with the social emotional well-being of kids, the anxiety, depression, keeping them out of school. But the pandemic just accelerated, and later in the article, one of the quotes from the article is, "Our relationship with school became optional." It was no longer seen as, this is a have to in your life. It became, I used to say, 20 years ago, I wanted to know that seminal moment when homework became optional, and then a big homework discussion earlier. Now it's, what was that seminal moment when just being in school became optional? There is compulsory attendance allegedly, but to, tackle that issue is huge. So I'm proud of the fact that the schools have taken kind of a more overt steps in addressing the issue.
Is there still an issue, or, is truancy, back in the day, somebody was truant, they were gone, and they were sneaking away and all this kind of stuff, so the police would go pick them up.
Sneaking away to do what, Ray?
Huh?
Sneaking away to do what?
Smoking cigarettes.
They gotta do it, not smoke. Now they go sneak away and vape.
Maybe.
It's less sneaking away, it's more just not.
That's not-
They just don't come.
So, we have
Yeah.
we have kids that
Sure.
like literally come for 5 periods a day and skip the 2 they don't wanna go to. And they're somewhere around.
We're chasing around way too
Yes.
many detentions for like unexcused absences. One of the changes we're gonna be making next year is that if a kid is gone for X percentage of the time, we'll have metrics for our team to meet and know what those data points are. Conversations with parents will be had, and eventually when they reach a point, we're gonna tell them like, listen, if you get to this many days, it's part of our handbook, it's part of our policy, like, you're gonna be dropped from this class, there's too many days gone. Of course, there's medical, things that come up and along the way, but the other one is unexcused absences, so we will address unexcused absences differently than that. If you're choosing to skip, instead of chasing around detentions, where you're gonna have, some pretty severe, conversations that happen, if you choose to skip a class 4 times in a semester, that's blatantly saying, some not nice words to the teacher, like, I don't care about your class, and I'm just not gonna come, there's nothing you can do about it. Well, you reach 4 of those, we're gonna be having a conversation with your parents about whether you should continue with the class if you're unexcused 4 times, so.
That is, the district sent out an email, I think hopefully it went to all the parents.
Yeah, it is. Just,
What was the, did you get any response back from that?
Yes.
Only you got that one.
Yes, we did.
So I'd just be curious what response you got back from that, and how can we, as a community, tie the parent responsibility back into that again?
Yeah. Part of the responses is that it was very clear in my mind when I said that. It was not clear when the average person read it, what that looked like when they got that, so I had to rephrase a few things in there. When we're talking about like absences and stuff like that, that was really about unexcused versus excused, and like we need to be able to determine what's excused versus unexcused. So like, hey, I'm just letting you know he's late because he overslept. That's not excused. That you're excusing it, but it's not excused on our end, right? So like that's one of those things. So excused versus unexcused, and what we're saying at that point is anything unexcused, what we're trying to say, is going to be punishable by detention. So like unexcused would be like, your children are skipping classes throughout the middle of the day. It's not I called out for a doctor's appointment, I missed for my brother's, whatever. You can call them out and excuse them, no detention's given. It was, if you're skipping class, or you slept in, or you just didn't want to come to school today, you're being held by a consequence. Now, I have about 30 detentions sitting on my desk that need to be handed out to kids because like those things are happening. We just need to have more conversations with them about like, not to hand out detentions all day long and waste all of our time and resources handing out detentions all day. What we need to do is we just need to say, if you're gonna be unexcused, you get 4. When you reach the 4,
What's the natural consequence?
you're the natural
And the
consequence of it.
protocol's already there as far as when parents or guardians are being contacted.
Yes. Yeah, that team is on it, we're on it like crazy, we're having as many as we can. There's a few that fall through, I mean, slip through because like they'll miss 2nd hour here, or 7th hour here, then 5th hour here, and they just, but now we'll have a report that tells us how many are unexcused versus excused, so.
Can I ask a quick, do we have an idea of maybe like top 5 reasons that we get the real chronic absenteeism in our district? I mean, I know like, I read that New York Times and listened, IPR had something last week, I think, about it, and I know a lot of, maybe you mentioned social emotional a little bit, but do we have, in our district, do we have an idea of what are maybe the top reasons that they're missing? Because I know some of them can be very much things, out of, parents that need the kids to be home to help work, or, just different things like that. I don't know if that's our district though, if that's, what does it look like
we
in our
have,
district?
give me grace when I say this, but like, we do have some very enabling parents, like, and they'll call them out for ill, and I finally we have to say like, were they really on Tuesday? Cause they were just ill on Friday of last week, and they were just ill on Wednesday of the previous week. Like, the illnesses that we see typically, this is 90+% of the time, are gonna be like in stretches. And we'll look at a kid like that was going 8 days, and we're like, oh, 3 here and 5 here, and Megan's like, yeah, they had X here that flew, and they caught something else here, we verified that. But like, the ones we're seeing are like, ill on Friday, ill on Friday, ill on Thursday and Friday, ill on Friday, ill on Wednesday, ill on, and it's just like, you're not ill 1 day a week. I mean, it's just, unless we're unaware of something, and Nurse Megan is always on top of those chronic illnesses that we have. That would be the number one thing, and the parents will call them out, and when we have conversations with parents, we're pretty direct with them. I have been probably a little more direct in the most recent meetings, like, I had to tell them, like, I think you're being really enabling, and we need more support at home for these things. And they've actually been like, you're right, half of it, and I'm glad they've responded that way, but most, adults, like, we need your support, like, they've gotta be here. I mean, we're reaching at a point now where I just told 2 sets of parents, like, if your kids are gone 1 more day, unless it's like, they're throwing up, whatever, like, they're just not gonna be able to pass. I mean, we're at that point, they're gone 35 days. So that won't happen next year.
I think mental health and just losing the connection is number 1. When it gets into then taking them out for club sports, taking them out for vacations, and they look innocuous enough on their own, but then put them together and all of a sudden they miss 15 days. Because they do get sick, they do miss 5 days a year because of the flu outbreak. But because they'd already missed, 5 days on Fridays because they're going to the hockey tournaments, and then they went on a family vacation, extended spring break by 3 days, and so on and so forth, because they went to Europe, and all of a sudden it adds up. It's a big number. It's just, school has become optional in the eyes of many.
We value face-to-face learning. That's what we're good at. We're good at face-to-face learning. We have great mentors, we have great teachers, so that's one thing we are just going to highly prioritize is we can get you here. We feel like we have good role models and help kids be successful, so. We'll try some new stuff, that will help out, I think, for attendance wise and stuff like that. What I've realized is through a very informal survey sent to the other WAMAC is we are really loose on our policies, when it comes to those things. And unless you ask, you don't always know that. So, like, for example, if a kid has an unexcused absence, they get a half-day suspension in one school district in our conference. Immediately.
At the same time, too, I'm gonna argue, what a stupid idea to kick kids out of school for not coming to school.
Yeah.
Out of school.
So you need to be more creative, I do think the more natural consequence is you don't get credit for the class. Now, that works best at the high school level, not so much the elementary and the middle, but.
Yeah, I'm not for that. This should be very clear.
But yeah, so just because they have it doesn't mean it's a good thing, but we are paying much more intentional, in our approaches to it. So Bobby, you want to dovetail?
Well, I can give the common middle school answer and say what they said, because we have, except for kids skipping class, because our kids don't have anywhere to go. I have all the same problems that they do with the attendance. It's my goal is a little different, was to decrease the number of kids by 10%. We did not do that. We have some kids that are no longer chronically absent, that were there last year, that are not this year. We have some new kids, on there. But, the big thing we've seen in the middle school is, you know, and I don't, like Matt said, I don't mean to be mean, but just the enabling parents. You know, oh, we're not gonna do anything today, cause, oh, I have this or that, you know, so parents will call them in. Or your kid's been sick, you know, gets sick at noon every Tuesday for the last 3 months. You know, what happens on Tuesdays? So really, the big thing that's come out of the goal for us, the thing that's helped, is forming that group of people, myself, Nurse Megan, Corey Leedy, and just going, you know, Kim Fall in the office house with the tenants, and even the teachers, when they meet as a team, they're talking about, hey, so-and-so's been gone for 3 days. Oh, that was a vacation, they'll be back. And, or they've been really sick, and, you know, things like that. So, just forming that team so we can really get a hold of parents and start talking about the why. Is it really a mental health thing that we can help address? Is it just that, yeah, oh my gosh, I've called them in 20 times, I thought it's only been like 3. No, it's been 20, so let's get to school. We send letters out and things like that to parents. The letters that, the first round that goes out is like 3 or 5 days, and that letter doesn't really seem to have too much of an effect on people. But then the next one that goes out is when they're, you know, double digits, and then in that one, if it's all because of, you know, they've been called out sick 12 times, the letter's phrased that if your kid is sick anymore, you know, we encourage a doctor's note, or you bring them to school and Nurse Megan can assess them. And if they miss so many more days for being ill, then that's truant. That one usually clears up a lot of illness. I mean, it's like the best antibiotic in the world. But,
So when he says truant, that's exactly what Rick was talking about, like we can take them to truancy, parents can be charged for truancy court because their kids are not coming to.
Okay, that was my question, I didn't know if they had such a thing.
Yeah, it's really for, ages
Well, once they hit 15, it's hardly worth pursuing it, because by the time it goes through the system, they'll be 16, and 16-year-olds can drop out.
so that's why we work together with our middle school, so they can start enacting that sooner. So that, because it's out of our hands at the high school, we can't really do it.
Truancy courts used to be a bigger thing, and then honestly, juvenile authorities essentially said, we have bigger fish to fry. And then, now there seems to be more teeth going back into it with current legislative action, but that remains to be seen. Because I know very few parents over time have actually been held accountable by a court of law through fines or jail time for the kids not coming to school. And you do see it culturally in families.
yeah, and the other thing I wanted to mention with our goal too is something that's come out of it is, you know, the teachers meeting daily as a team. I can think of at least one student at each grade level who was missing a lot of school, and because of the work of the, you know, the team of teachers are, you know, has now pretty much been here pretty much every day. You know, the one student did fall and break her leg, so she had to miss 2 days for that, but that was legit. But they've been to school, so teachers reaching out, teachers, and more so teachers getting in touch with the kids and just saying, you know, hey, how can we help? What can we do? And then we do have a lot of kids that are first diagnosed with something, you know, some kind of illness or something like that, that we've had, you know, a good number of our kids out for, you know, a week, 2 weeks, you know, 3 weeks because of some illness that they've been, or something they've been diagnosed with, that we work with the parents, and we've set up Zoom calls and things like that to work with. So that's been the biggest thing that's come out of that. Did we meet the goal and decrease it by 10%? No. But, writing it that way, I don't know if we ever will, just because you've got so many moving parts in there, but we're making things better. So that's the best part of it. So we've had a lot of good things come out of it, but we did not decrease the number by 10%. Are you guys done? Did you do all three?
Can I ask a question before
Sure.
we move on? It goes back to something Matt said. I'm not sure I really agree with the idea that if you get 4 unexcused absences, then you're failed out of class, or you can't pass. Because I think that goes back to what we were talking about with standards-based grading.
No,
With kids meeting all the standards, you can't fail them for the behavior. And if they're dropped from the class, that's an F, that's a retake, that's something you have to redo. You didn't get the F, but you still have to retake the class to graduate.
Yeah,
I don't know if we can do that.
Yeah, so what happens usually is most schools, what they do is like after 4 unexcused absences, they set a meeting with the parents and talk about their absenteeism is what usually happens. Yeah, so I said that, I didn't mean to say that, that's not what I said.
Because I was like,
Yeah, no, after 4 unexcused absences, we will have a meeting with parents at that point, and then probably come up with some sort of plan. If that plan's not met at that point, what's happening to that kid's just saying, like, I'm just not gonna keep going to class, is what they're continually, it becomes a habit, and they're just saying, like, for sicknesses,
I
for
think you
mis-
said 25 days or something.
what's that?
Didn't you say 25?
Maybe I heard.
Yeah, there's a difference between unexcused versus excused. If the kid's going for like sports and music and they're sick, or their parents said like, for excused reasons, at some point, the 25%, that becomes a point where like, you need to attend at least 75% of your classes for you to pass this class.
Well, yeah, that's when I talk about natural consequences. You eventually reach a point of, you've missed so many, that if the material is being delivered in a quality way, there is a certain tipping point you reach where it's impossible to pass the class because you've missed too much of the vital information to meet the standards. It's not, we're dropping you, college style, okay, we're dropping you because you never come.
But the unexcused absence part is a bigger deal, like that's a fraction of that, that's versus excused. The unexcused is really, I'm choosing not to go to class on my own. Once we reach 4 of those days, like if they skip 4 of those classes, we're gonna have a conversation with their parents about like, you're creating a ton of extra work for not being a legit reason, because you just said, I don't wanna come. So if this is gonna continue, this is where we're at. Whereas the the excused reasons, that's gonna be more like a 10, 15, 20, 25% deal where we start having those conversations, not before.
I just misheard.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Why are you sorry? I misheard.
What about?
Okay, my academic goal was by the end of May 2024, all Mount Vernon Middle School teachers will have identified priority content standards, developed assessments to measure student proficiency on those priority standards, and align priority standards within their departments. So basically, in a nutshell, this is kind of like what we were talking about with some of the last 5 things there with EBR, was we went back and kind of reviewed a lot of that. Teachers, when we started EBR, kind of went through and identified their priority standards, their transferable skills, and this was kind of going back and rechecking that. I have singleton teachers, so I have 1 6th grade math teacher, 1 5th grade, 1 7th grade, 1 8th grade. So this was getting them together in PLCs. They met weekly. They used our early out Wednesday PLC time, and then they scheduled a meeting either before or after school on the opposite weeks. So they met weekly and they were talking about their transferable skills, their priority standards, how they were teaching that. And I told them at the beginning of the year, the idea is I want you as a 7th grade science teacher to know as much about 6th grade, what 6th graders are doing. I want to make sure that what they're learning in 6th grade is what they need to be successful in 7th grade. Now, 6th grade and 7th grade science content, I could have one without the other and be just fine, because it's completely different stuff. But the transferable skills, that's the piece where, I'm learning my scientific writing here. What base am I building on each transferable skill in 6th grade that relates to 7th grade and then 8th grade? Because in science, the content is different across the 3 grades. You could have one without the other and be just fine content-wise. But what are we doing to build the knowledge of those transferable skills and our skill set there for our students? So myself, Leslie Bruner, our instructional coach, Michelle Boyden sat in on a few of the PLC meetings, and teachers were doing a lot of these things. They wrote down some rabbit holes here and there, talking about specific standards, all kinds of different things. So a lot of great conversations came out of those meetings, and we made a lot of headway on that. We do have those things identified, like you can have the transferable skills for science, priority standards, so you can have those documents. But going beyond that, they went into, hey, here's how we're doing that. This is what, they had a lot of really good, rich conversations there. Our cultural goal was by the end of May 2024, Leader in Me, our overall school improvement program that we started this year. All those lessons will be taught to students. Leader in Me will be fully implemented by teaching those lessons, and then teachers and students will reflect on the Leader in Me program. Just last Wednesday, we met with our Leader in Me coach from the program, and we talked through some stuff about next year. We started our core 2. There's 3 different books. So he had us do some kind of reflection and stuff like that on the Leader in Me program. So we're working on that, we've got, the lessons will be done this Monday, I believe. Yeah, so this Monday will be the last round of lessons that teachers will teach to students, and we've gotten through all of the lessons. So those are our 3 academic, behavior, and cultural goals. Questions for me?
All right, our academic goal was by June 2024, so we don't quite know yet. 85% of assessed standards will be scored as proficient in the area of math on end of the year report cards. So I do have the results from our second conference report. And on our math standards, 86% of our kids received, it's not 86% of our kids, we took the whole number of standards that we graded out on or scored out on, and 86% of those were proficient. So it's like 4,639 standards for math by the time you do all of our students across all grade levels. Same for in math last year at the end of the year, our students were 80% proficient. Those standards were 80% proficient, so we moved it to 85. And again, as of March, we were at 86. The English language arts is by June 2024, 80% of assessed standards for ELA will be proficient on end of the year report cards. We were 75% in the spring of last year, and we had 11,210 standards reported out on, and 86% of those standards were proficient as well. So we're well on our way. We won't know again until we do end of the year report cards here in another week. Our behavioral goal was individual behavior plans will be documented for all tier 2 and tier 3 students with formal interventions, data collection tools, and monthly data review. That was kind of a big goal for us as we brought on Jessica Patrick as our behavior interventionist. And we were able to, and that was an area that we really struggled with before, is to put those succinct plans into place and collect the data and report out on those. And we had 19 students on behavior plans this year, which is 3% of our students would be about what we would expect to see between 3 and 5%. So that was really good. And our cultural goal was by May of 2024, the PBIS team will increase opportunities for positive rewards and celebrations, upgrade signage, referral forms, protocols for student support. The PBIS team will also increase capacity building within the current staff members to provide multiple opportunities for feedback and improvement. So some of the things that we've done this year on our PBIS team, we've created all new signs, new rewards, more frequent checks of office referrals, and then putting students who needed them on those behavior plans. So sometimes we look at our office referrals, and if students have 3 or more office referrals in a certain category, we then put them on a supplemental behavior plan. We asked teachers to increase opportunities for students to receive positive feedback. And so those are some of the things we've done to increase the culture in our building as well.
I love how oftentimes you hear language arts curriculum described as an inch deep and a mile wide. Double the number of standards in language arts than that.
Almost triple, 4,639 to 11,210.
That's insane. And that's true in middle school, high school, language arts, I would say. Uber more standards than others.
Okay, well, thank you. Our next item is the update on our solar power option. Oh, I'm sorry. Put my glasses back on. Approval of contract.
First person is Mallory Gerber, is the recommendation to replace Marcia Purington, who is leaving us after 25-ish years of service as our food service director. Marcia's been wonderful. You saw Mallory's resume is deep enough. We had 3 very strong candidates for this position that we interviewed. And so Mallory was our choice for that position. So I would ask for a motion to approve her as the new food service nutrition director.
I move to approve Mallory
director position.
Okay, that's been moved and seconded, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed?
An open science position in seventh grade, Courtney Stroman, who's done an outstanding job for us the last couple of years. Her husband graduated from Iowa's dental school and is taking over the family practice up in the north central part of the state, so she's leaving us. Kaya O'Neill, coincidentally enough, was a close number 2 a couple of years ago when Courtney was hired, and she has gone off and has been a science teacher in Alburnett for the last couple of years. Alburnett superintendent talked to me last week, and essentially we were talking about timing, and he goes, I hear you're possibly interested in our science teacher, and I know you're going to take her because you should. So, her current boss gives her high marks, so Kaya is the recommendation to fill the seventh grade science position. We've done that with social studies, but then we eventually approved it, and then. But there's 2 of them. Yeah, we put this one on hold as well, I'm sorry.
Was she one of the official?
She was not one of the
She was
initial
not the
people.
initial.
No.
That's like, I just kidding.
We did reach out to the person who originally was going to be, was on it, and she chose not to re-engage with us, so. But Kaya did this time, so.
Motion for approval? Okay, it's been moved and seconded, all in favor say aye. That is passed. Now we can hear about the solar power option.
Okay, brief update, we have been, looking into solar power as an option, number 1, to save the district money, and number 2, to also be friendly to our environment. We have talked in depth with, Red Lion Solar, who has done the work for the city of Mount Vernon, for both, especially the, LBC and the police department, the old church. So we have a proposal from them. They originally gave us some ideas of where to put solar panels, and we asked them to make some adjustments to that, because we did not think placement of some of those was going to work, including putting some of the detention areas out here, by the activities complex. They have reworked a plan and submitted it to us last week. We were kind of on the fast track for a while with getting this and trying to get stuff done quickly, and then we kind of pulled back and said, we need to take our time to make sure we do this right. In the interim, Mayor Weitzel had a conversation with Eagle Point Solar, who he has worked with in the past. And so Eagle Point is going to come out tomorrow and do a walkthrough of our campus with several of us. The facilities committee has been in the loop on this. So I assume we will get a similar proposal from Eagle Point. And they have a power purchase agreement that essentially allows districts and cities to put in the infrastructure for solar at no cost. And then in the beginning years, we see upwards of $45,000 to $50,000 a year savings on our utilities, while they reap the benefits of the investment in purchasing power. It's been a great arrangement for the city loves it, the city thinks it's gonna save over $1 million over time, and we've been told that we could expect the same kind of savings over time. So we are looking at that, so after Eagle Point does this thing and comes forward with the proposal, we'll run that by the facilities committee first, and it'll eventually come to you as a full board, I'm guessing sometime probably during the summer consideration. Red Lion was really, focused on trying to get this done this summer, but we decided that we would take a little more time and not rush it, so that's where it stands. Potential of solar power as an option moving forward.
And Greg, you said the Red Lion, they do LBC and the police, what does Eagle do for the city?
Eagle Point had, so Tom Weisler was involved as a solar, he worked in the solar industry there, one of the 72 jobs after his retirement. Was working with Eagle Point Solar, so he had contacts there that reached out to him in the last week and a half. So then he forwarded those people to me. I met with the Eagle Point person, last week, and decided that we would have a second option to consider as well. So So they've done similar work with other cities. Them does many school districts as Vernon has. But, the power purchase agreement has really been enticing the cities and school districts recently to be able to get the infrastructure in place at no cost to the district. We can eventually buy it if we want to, or we can stay in an arrangement with them forever. And, they have data that shows very clearly that they can say, the red line reports that would say $46,000 a year on their utilities. Go to these options, so obviously, given our financial situation, it behooves us to look into it and also friendly to the environment. So Alliant, Red Line, or Eagle Point, I'm sorry, has asked Red Line to come in and do a new, has asked Alliant to come in to do a new study of our utility use. They did it about 8 or 9 years ago, so they're going to come in sometime soon and just do a new assessment of our utility use and how solar can help that. So that's where that stands.
Okay, thank you. Now we're ready for our budget amendment.
So in the packet, there's two, expenditure categories that you'll be, voting to approve tonight. Basically for both of these non-instructional programs and total other expenditures. Just last year at this time, when we did the FY '24 budget for this school year, those amounts were certified at the amount listed in the left-hand column there. And then going through the budget process, this year we do a re-estimation of the current fiscal year, just to see where we are going to end up. Through that re-estimation, it looked like we were going to be exceeding the certified amounts, so then we just have to go through this budget amendment process. So non-instructional programs is basically just our nutrition program and our daycare program. The reason that we're amending the budget for this one is just there's underestimations in revenues and expenditures both. Obviously, if revenues were lower, the expenditures were going to be lower to reflect that. So revenues came in higher than expected, which and expenditures were coming in higher. So we need to amend the budget to factor in that. And then same thing with the total other expenditures. Total other includes 3 different categories. It's got debt service, construction, and I think other. So this is kind of related to the activities complex, just underestimated the amount of funding we're gonna get from private donations. And once we got the numbers, they came in higher than what we budgeted for last year, so then our expenditures increased as well. So just for both those categories, we just need to approve those and get this sent off to the county and the state.
So contextually, with the activities complex, we are going to be right at the projected number once all expenses are paid. There are still some expenses that have not been paid, because that money is being held back until all the punch list items are done. We were trying to get those done quickly, but, the weather is most of them are related to, landscaping, and the weather has not been cooperating for them to come out and do some of that final, work so we can pay them their last $100,000 plus. But once we pay that, we will be right at, we're not going over what we anticipated we would spend on the activities complex, but in the FY '24 year, we did do a couple of upgrades late in the project, especially around stabilization of the ground for the track and the field, that bumped up a little bit more, the cost of that. At the same time, what Michael said too, we anticipated we were going to get about $2.2 million in, private donations, and we ended up getting 2.7. So.
And I'll reiterate that both of these really just boil down to the unknown of revenues coming in, and you're not gonna, when you're doing estimations a year out, you're not gonna say, right up front that your expenditures are going to be more than your revenue, so it's more just a.
I think this is the third time in my 7 years that Rich hasn't made the budget in a year.
But the revenues, but this is an amendment increase.
Yeah, and this is, so I'm talking about revenues increasing, but what you're voting on, what you're looking at is expenditures. And it's basically just because when you're doing the whole, certified budget process, you have up top, you have your revenues, go through the formula and everything, down to your expenditures. And if the revenues are lower up here, your expenditures down below are gonna be less, but if the revenues up.
So am I correct in saying that we don't have to amend the budget if our revenues are higher, but we do have to amend it if our expenditures are higher?
Yeah, you don't,
Okay.
yes,
Just-
you only have to do it with, you only have to amend the budget when it talks about the expenditures. Your revenue can be whatever it is, but it's the expenditure numbers, and just as we're developing the budget, we're factoring in revenues to it. If we could have ran each of these funds negative, or all of these categories negative last year, and not had to amend it, but just so we can run negative in the certified budget process. We did it the way that we did last year.
It's a common practice for
Yeah,
districts.
there's districts that just know they're gonna amend the budget every year just because they know that they don't know the miscellaneous income that they're gonna get every year. So they just know that they're gonna take a look at it and okay, just to do this process every year. And there's a handful of reasons that you can, that the district we can do. A lot of districts, we weren't one of them because we got, hardly anything in COVID money, but a lot of districts, during COVID time, were amending their budgets because they had so much more money to spend that was, they just didn't know about in the spring of 2019 or even the spring of 2020 when all this was going on.
So these numbers aren't net, they're just, when it says
Correct, these are
other
strictly
expenditures.
expenditures there. So, we'll just need.
I move that we accept the amendment to the budget.
It's been moved. You get a second?
I haven't yet.
Second.
Second, that's something we have to do. Roll call, or we gotta just, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That is passed. Oh, now we get 48 policies. Three.
Okay, so, as I shared in a couple of the documents I gave you, which is policy rollouts, there's 3 different, categories of policies. Number 1, policy updates that came to us through IASB through their quarterly policy updates. Then there's a series of policies that we currently do not have, that we must have if we want to receive the, $150,000 in, safety grants that we're working on currently. So it's required by the federal government that we have some policies in place we currently don't have in place, so I'm asking you to add those 4. And then, the state came up with a new, what they call a triennial assessment for wellness policies a couple of years ago. So we needed to update the wellness policy, to meet the standards for this triennial assessment. The wellness committee worked on that during the course of the year and has a new, tool to use to measure progress toward goals to meeting the policy language. So, briefly, through the IASB ones, you received the, reasons why the updates were made. Most of them are in the areas of school finance. The first couple had to do with the fact that, the place that now people apply for jobs is called Iowa Works. So this is replacing the old, language around where people will apply for jobs. This doesn't go into the fact that Iowa Works absolutely sucks. But that's a problem for another day. As much as we tell the state how badly this tool is, how bad this tool is, they don't pay a whole lot of attention to it. They did rescind, a couple of current policies around student fundraising and created a new one in this very same packet. They updated a health services regulation that now better matches the Iowa code for health services administration in districts. Then they went into some finance policies, the first being around this local, state, federal miscellaneous revenue, where they allowed more flexibility that allows more individuals to receive revenues from the district other than just the treasurer for the school board. It talks about districts still wanting to ensure appropriate internal control procedures. Our internal control procedures are always seen as exemplary by our auditors, so we're in good shape there. Again, they did create a new fundraising policy and regulation. I tweaked just a little bit of the language with that from the exemplar that they gave us, especially around the idea of they had in their draft that students would not fundraise door to door. While I'm not a fan of door-to-door fundraising, we use language more along the lines of that students would not be required to go door-to-door to do fundraising, but we still have it as an option in this district. Obviously, a couple of our major fundraising activities still are door-to-door with the football team and their tickets, the booster club and the outreach every year is a door-to-door endeavor. So those changes were made. Payroll issues were, new payroll language policies were just language around tax sheltered annuities for people. One was just a change in the title of the policy, so pay deduction policy is now just referred to as reduction in employee pay. There's also regulation that went with that. And then there was one policy, presentation and publication of financial information created to encompass 3 policies into one, so 2 policies were rescinded. And then there was some audit language around updating the policy to ensure that independent auditors are certified by the state, and that audits must be filed with the state auditor every year, that they're completed. And then audit committee was basically one that they allowed more flexibility in determining who is on an audit committee. There's nothing major here that jumped out as anything we didn't support. I ran everything by Michael with the ones that were finance related, which was most of them. It's mostly just making sure that new policy language aligns with current Iowa code, which is typically what we see with most policy updates. So questions about any of those in that area? You had a question, Jason, around usage of the terms secretary and treasurer. We touched base with some people on that, and the district can always decide, right now that role in this district lies in the hands of one person. The district could decide to separate those out. So the language is kind of generic to hit all 333 school districts. So that's why you don't go into every policy and declare, if for this policy it's gonna be the secretary, for this policy it's gonna be the treasurer. And every district does things differently. Like, not in every district is the SBO the secretary or treasurer. So was there more to that question than that?
Oh, one of them just said the secretary in the bottom part, and one of them only said the treasurer, but the top of it said secretary / treasurer. So, we don't have a treasurer, like, we kept it secretary, treasurer all the way through, would it be more consistent, like you're saying?
I'll double check that language with them.
As long as it's following all the lines and all.
Yeah, that we don't have a problem with.
Because, yeah, one of them just got this, a position, only person responsible is a position it didn't have, so.
Did you accept the first reading policy?
Okay, hold on, we're not That's the first read. So the second group then is the policies, that need to be in place for us to, pursue the safety grant that we are on the cusp of getting done. Well, these many years. It's code of ethics policy, a policy around, professional conduct and ethics for staff, policy related to, purchasing policy that, needs to be in place that we did not have in place with regards to appropriate vendors and then internal controls procedures. These are not required policies from IASB, but they are ones that the federal government does require for us to be eligible for this grant, which I would assume then any other major federal grants coming down the pipe would need these. I would recommend you pass these now, but then review them at a later time and decide whether or not tweak the language. They need to know, they asked when we would approve these, I said by June 10th, which was the second reading. So I would encourage you to pass them now if you wanted to go back and look at the language of the code of ethics and make changes to it, or the ones around vendors and everything are pretty straightforward. Or if you wanted to double check the internal controls, you can do that. But for now, for the purposes of securing that grant, we need to have those in place. The wellness policy,
Can I ask a question?
yes, go ahead.
So what's the protocol, since that's a, did those policies go in front of legal counsel, or what's the policy or protocol on that?
So for these four, it was just them telling us, we have, so we had to submit to them a series of policies that they requested, to ensure that we had all the, proper policies in place to pursue federal grants to, what's it called?
Yeah, it's on the website.
Yeah.
But does that, would there be any, confusion, or is there now potentially two different codes of conduct?
No.
Policies? I mean,
Well,
There's one for the ethics of just the board itself.
Yeah.
And then there's one for the staff, and then there's something else, right?
yes, there, you said it right. So code number 2204 is a code of ethics for the board. It's in the 200 series, which is the series that speaks to the board.
but is there already a policy with the,
ISB.
These policies would be, in IASB, they're just not required.
Yeah.
They're just.
So there are policies that are required and others that are recommended. These are more in the recommended category. These are vetted by the IASB legal counsel.
that was my
So they're, yeah, so yes, they're all vetted by them. So we're just adding policies that for whatever reason over time the board. I will tell you, when I first started, the former SBO described us as policy light.
That's for sure.
And, I think we kind of took pride in that for a while, and I think we've learned over time that we should be policy light. Because it's a perfect example of them saying, well, unless you have those in place, the $150,000 check ain't coming. Then with the wellness policy, we worked last year with the, director of nutrition for the state on, reasons why the policy needed to be updated, and then we spent the entire year this year, making sure that this policy essentially matches the exemplary policy from, what's the name of the group? Alliance for a Healthier Generation. So this policy, basically word for word, is what they say is the exemplary policy and regulation. But what's more important with that is what's not in the policy, and that's work that the wellness committee did around identifying wellness policies and goals. So we set out a series of goals from anything from healthy foods goals to activities of recess goals to activities in PE class goals and everything. Much more clear goals for us to follow, and we must submit progress toward those goals to the state every year as part of what's called the triennial assessment. So this assessment, once we submit this to the state after it's approved, then every 3 years we'll come back and look at the progress toward the goals over that 3-year period we broke people into subcommittees, food service people work on food goals, PE health teachers work on the PE health goals, administrators trying to do some things, so that's why that one is in place. So that is all the policies that potentially we can move to approve and do a second, and if you have any questions, we can do that in the discussion part.
Do you want us to approve that one section and then
Just do them all.
just approve them all?
Just do them all one big happy
We're just
family.
doing the first reading, right?
Correct.
Move to accept first reading.
Second.
Been moved and seconded.
Any questions or anything else?
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay, thank you. Board reports. Can we, outline what we're doing with the SBO?
Okay, so two things, these will tie into calendar thing. Why don't you go ahead and do the, consent agenda first, and then we'll come back under calendar and talk about the SBO and,
Any other, committee report, anything you really want to highlight? Christie?
Approve the consent agenda?
I had one question about one of the bills, just because so I saw there's a bill for $11,821.91 for science kits. Is that something that we pay Grantwood in addition for, or what's the bill for that?
That is science kits. So
Yeah, it's what all of our teachers use for science.
No, I
Yes,
know,
it is,
I
yes,
thought
it's-
it was something.
No, it's additional
No, it's
costs
additional.
every year.
yeah, we do a PO every year for that. That's, how many kids did we decide that was this morning?
Yeah, I mean, it's 4 per every grade level at my grade level, so over 100.
Plus we use the middle
Yeah,
school.
plus the middle
Probably got
school.
about 8.
I'm not questioning.
No, yes, yes.
It's
But that's an
additional cost.
That's
I
an
just didn't
addition too.
realize it was an additional cost.
So that's something, so we met today with, Grantwood representatives, and they're trying to figure out the, kind of the costing of everything, and they're getting pretty close. I think we have a meeting Wednesday as superintendents with John Spear from AEA, so we're getting a better idea of what those things may cost moving forward, including, is it gonna be paid, to flow through money to the AEA, or money we're keeping, is it gonna, or is it something that's like this, continues to be paid for separately?
Because that's my concern, is, that's was one of the things that people said, don't pay what science kits.
Right.
I was like, well, apparently we're already paying for those.
Yes,
Why-
yeah.
I pay for them out of my budget every year.
I have one legitimate question on, so we have a protocol in place as far as, unused fuel, for example, like, as far as any contracts that get out over a certain dollar amount, we must have 2 bids or.
We have a policy in place for, I don't remember the numbers off the top of my head, but we have 3 different, levels for bidding. So the first level is,
Up to 10,000.
It can just be
Up,
approved,
up.
and also up to 10,000 can just be approved, and then between 10,000 and
$49,999.
we go through the informal bid process, and then anything above that, we do the whole shebang for that.
If you do an you have to do an RFP for anything $50,000, you have to go through a whole RFP process for $50,000. So for example, with safety grants, we're in that 10,000, 49,999. So as we look at things like, new camera systems and everything, as long as they fall in that, we just need to get 3 bids. So Sean Flockhart is in charge of that, he's going out and getting 3 bids. But yeah, once it gets 50,000 and above, then it must go through a formal RFP process, sealed bids, approval by the board, the whole enchilada.
And stuff like, you know, fuel, for example, anything contracted, that could be contracted, I mean, do we have to look at doing any of that stuff?
Is that one, the bids we do, or this, food bids, or is that just the food stuff?
We do the food bid, the fuel, I mean, it's always Lynn County Co-op, I don't think there's a bidding process for that, it's just they're the one supplier.
And it's something that could be done, but
I'll check into that. I'll check on it. Any other questions for the vote?
Okay, it's been moved, wait for a second.
Second.
Moved and seconded to accept the consent agenda, all in favor say aye. Opposed? That is passed, thank you.
Okay, so two things calendar-wise. First of all, the plan tentatively is to complete interviews for the school business official position on Thursday, May 23rd. Rick has talked to the board members that he has earmarked for being involved in that process. So we'll reach out to the candidates tomorrow to see if they can come in on the 23rd. Matt Lehman is scheduled to take that day off to lead that process. He's asked me to do the legwork on getting the protocols set up and the interview scheduled for him once the selection comes. It's his hire. So tentatively right now it's scheduled for next Thursday, the 23rd. Right now we have 4 candidates identified that we think have resumes that would make them viable candidates for the position. We have another 4 candidates that whose experience did not match what our expectations would be. So that's, hopefully I'll have the schedule put together tomorrow, and we'll share that with people that need to know. We'll have a variety of people, including board members, district office people, we'll have a teacher rep, we'll have a support staff rep, we'll have a, so those people, including board members, and,
The way it's kind of been set up, it's a day-long process.
we're hoping to get it all done in a day, and hopefully all the candidates can clear their schedules to be available on Thursday, 23rd. Secondly, we are working toward a resolution, I do believe, with the Mount Vernon Education Association around how to distribute the money from the new teacher pay law onto the salary schedule. Pretty much looks like we're going to put $959 and some cents for every certified staff person. That's in addition then to the $1,600 bonuses that you have offered them for next year. So we're getting that done. What's still hanging out there is the approval of their contracts. So we're going to need a special meeting to approve their contracts, which I would like to accomplish before the last day of school. So I'm going to ask you to look at your calendars to see what next week looks like for you, for the possibility of a very brief special meeting for the approval of all staff contracts. That would be certified staff and support staff. If you don't wanna make a commitment tonight, if we could maybe know by noon tomorrow or something.
I'm available Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday.
Or what type of, are you talking evening? What are you?
Wide open.
Could be first thing in the morning.
Could be, could,
Does anybody mind first thing in the morning?
That would be fine.
What time is the morning?
I could on Wednesday or Thursday. Yeah.
so I'm hearing it, what would a Wednesday morning on the 22nd look like?
22nd, yeah.
What's a time that would work in the morning for, like I said, what should be a very brief meeting?
5:30.
The farmer votes for 6.
I could do 6.
Or 7:30.
2 for 6 and 1 for 5. Get 2 more in, the rest of us asleep. Actually, I only need 1. Get 1 more person to show up.
7:30?
7:30.
How brief?
5-10 minutes?
3 action items, the teachers, the support staff and coaches.
The only item on the agenda will be an approval of the contracts as submit it, I guess.
Yeah, I'd rather go earlier or later. I mean, I can make it work, I need to get 4 kids out the door.
Are you talking, can you make 7:30 or?
I'm saying I would prefer earlier or later unless that really doesn't work.
7 meet your definition of earlier?
If it's quick, that would be a little easier, and I can get back then.
7?
I'd rather do so.
7?
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, 7.
Okay.
Wednesday, the 1st.
Office.
Yes, let's do it at the district office. Okay. Okay.
And the other problem I had was the June 10th board meeting. I have to be in Montana on June 10th. I was hoping we could get a quorum put together for June 3rd. I understand there's not much on the agenda, but I would like to be here for that. How many people will be unable to make a June 3rd meeting?
I cannot make June 3rd, as long as you got 4 people.
I can.
Okay, if we can get 5 people here, it'll be okay.
Planning the same time, 6:30.
6:30 on June 3rd. I appreciate you accommodating.
Information that will be pertinent to that meeting, I'll get out to everyone within a week. Like, for example, it's the time when we approve the emergency operations plan every year, I will send you a copy of that plan in case you want to offer feedback on it. So, anything that you would potentially want to have feedback on if you cannot attend the meeting will be in your hands, within the week.
And that will be your last meeting.
Correct. That will be the swan song.
Okay.
I think we should have a special board.
I know you really don't wanna do that, so. Better than a 3-hour meeting tonight.
Okay, well, it was a very good meeting, very informative. Thank you all for your patience. I'd entertain a motion for adjournment. Moved and seconded, we adjourn tonight, all in favor, say aye. Opposed? We are adjourned, thank
Should be a fiction.
you. I thought I was leaving, and I all of a sudden,